This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in that fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, Michael Barr, Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene. August Monday.
Yeah.
Feels like
boy.
it, but look at the equity markets churning here. Just won't give it up. Futures at negative 3. Last week, I believe, was the most successful bull week since time began.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we were
biblical.
Yeah, exactly. But we had it's the summertime. It's August, and there's not a lot happening, but there's a lot of economic data. The Democrats are getting together in Chicago, and we're going to have a lot of the Bloomberg folks out there. So there'll be a lot of headlines coming around this week, along with some economic data.
Yeah, two big events, Chicago, and then on our way to Jackson Hole. We'll have that for you. We'll talk about that.
Wow.
The speech, I guess, it's a talking point, I guess.
Yep.
But what's he going to say? I
No.
mean, it's what he's not going to say.
Right.
That matters. What I want to talk about, I walked in our studios today, nicest studios in radio, by the way.
No question.
No one was here.
No?
John Tucker is off.
No.
Nixon was president.
Exactly.
The last time Tucker was off.
Yeah, I mean, what is John Tucker doing on vacation? I mean,
no one knows. It's too exciting.
He goes to Home Depot.
You're right. He goes to Home Depot. He builds a
high points to go to Home Depot and do woodworking.
Yep.
Enjoy your hours off, Mr. Tucker. As they say, futures -1. We'll do a whole data check for you, get you set up for the week. And we've got a great list of conversations for you to frame out that August angst. Are we going to rebalance, readjust into September? Margie Patel, and we'll start strong with her. Patrick Armstrong, love him. He'll be on with us in the next hour as well. We're on YouTube, thrilled at the sign up. Good morning, Bangalore in India. Whoa. And all in the Asia evening. We're stunned at the Asia evening interest. Thank you for that. On Android Auto, Apple CarPlay as well. From the Interactive Broker Studios of Bloomberg Business Flash, first of the week, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. We have little movement in futures. This is following Wall Street's best week since November. Right now we have NASDAQ futures down about 15 points. Dow futures down about 2 points. S&P futures down about a point. We have the 2-year yield at 4.04%. That's little change. And the yield on the 10-year, 3.87%. That's down 1 basis point. Not much on the economic calendar for today. The Conference Board is going to issue that index of leading economic indicators for July, but really all eyes set toward Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where Fed Chair Jay Powell set to speak on Friday. Now, meanwhile, the Fed's Mary Daly told the Financial Times she has, quote, more confidence that inflation is under control. Today, we'll hear from the Fed's Christopher Waller. Over to commodities, we have oil lower. Brent crude $78 a barrel. WTI crude $75 a barrel.
Nice.
We have spot gold lower at $2,489 an ounce. There's a leadership change over at Estee Lauder. The company says CEO Fabrizio Freda plans to retire at the end of June 2025. Now, he's held that position since 2009. They also had a forecast that missed estimates. Their ADR is down about 7%. And Kroger holding investor calls starting today as it weighs a new bond sale. Kroger up more than 0.5%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Margie Patel joins us right now, Senior Portfolio Manager at Allspring. And looking at the mid-year, looking at it all, I want to take a short-term view of 3 years out and look at the classic dividend and use of cash. Margie, if there's share buybacks, like we're in a frenzy right now, everybody agrees with that, is the all-in use of cash, dividends, dividend growth, share buyback, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is it greater than 47% of the total return?
It is about that, yes. And it just shows that companies look at how they should most efficiently allocate their resources, whether it's CapEx, raising the dividend or having a dividend, or buying back shares.
When you see buyback shares, if you've got 10 companies lined up, how do you discern of the 10 companies where buying back shares are constructive, say 3 or 4 of them, and others that are sort of faking it, 5 or 6 of them?
Well, really, I think companies don't even buy back shares unless they feel they have the liquidity to carry themselves forward. So I think it's a reflection that companies have money, they have optimism that they think it's better to buy back shares because the value of shares are going to be higher in the future. So I'm pretty neutral about the amount of buyback, especially buyback versus dividend.
Paul, I see cash and equivalents. Apple Computer last 12 months.
Oh boy,
153 billion.
Yep. What do you do with that, Bargy? We're just kind of where we got through the latest earnings cycle here. What were your takeaways from corporate America in terms of earnings, and maybe how that dovetails into your valuation call?
Yeah. Well, after we had a couple quarters where corporate earnings were surprising upside, especially from the tech sector where everyone was a little bit nervous. In this last quarter, we had results that were pretty good in the tech sector, large tech sector, but mixed. We had some disappointments. And I think that really lays the groundwork for the third quarter. And I think it's one of the reasons we had the market have a little wobble, because it suggests that maybe the growth rate of large tech stocks, which have been so much a part of the market, look as if they may want to decelerate. And if that happens, then you'll have less capital expenditures across the whole tech sector. You may have PE compression, price earnings ratios go down, which would be almost just as important as if companies lowered their earnings. Just less optimism reflected in lower price earnings ratios could actually be just as damaging to a company who actually lowered their earnings outlook.
So, I mean, I guess, Margie, a lot of folks continue to ask throughout this year is, do I stick with the big tech stocks that have been working so well for me for such a long time? Or do I try to find some, I guess, value out there in the marketplace? If you have fresh money today, where would you be looking?
Well, I think you still have to spread it around, and it's really hard to get away from tech, because if you look at the growth rate of the economy over the next few quarters, it looks like it's going to be very modest, maybe 1.5% or maybe 2%. And that says to me, you really have to stick with the high growth sectors. You can't expect a value stock to really thrive and do well and have competitive earnings increases if the whole economy is going very low. So I think you still have to stick with the basic themes. And then when a company in a space looks as if their earnings are decelerating, just say, well, that's not a name I'm going to add to, or that's not a name I'm going to consider.
Yeah. Margie, is there an opportunity now to buy, in a broader sense, the financials?
Well, I think that if you have short rates lowered, which we all hope one day we might see that happen, I'm not sure that's really going to help a lot of financial institutions increase their net interest margin. And then in the financial sector, you have so much crowding from new players, from private players coming in and trying to take away share from some of the traditional lenders like the banks. So I'm sort of lukewarm on the sector.
Where are you less than lukewarm? I mean, I look at what we observed in the last 10 days, Margie, and you and I am sure we're looking at the same Bunker Ramos screen going, they got to be kidding me. I mean, when you get the opportunity like we had 10 days ago, what did you do?
Well, actually, I added a little in the industrial space, because I think there are some companies that are part of the bigger long-term themes, whether it's data center construction or reshoring or increasing capital investment in say, semiconductor factories here, or improving the electrical grid. I think that there's still some opportunities in those spaces, rather limited, but I think they're attractive. Also, environmental is always a good area.
And Margie Patel, thank you for getting us started on this Monday. Margie Patel of Boston Always, and with Allspring as well. Red and green on the screen, ever so fractional. It's an August float here on a Monday morning. The VIX back a stick, 15.69. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. The Democratic National Convention is kicking off today in Chicago, just weeks after President Biden ended his campaign and endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris. The president will be center stage giving a primetime speech. The event is also expected to draw thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters. Yesterday, Harris campaigned in Pennsylvania, speaking in Pittsburgh.
When you stand for working people, you fight for working people. When you stand for freedom, whether it be to make decisions about your own body or love who you love, you fight for those things. When you believe in ending child poverty, you fight for that.
Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump is planning an aggressive schedule that will see him visit the U.S.-Mexico border, hold rallies in 4 key swing states this week, and sit for a series of interviews. While Harris leads Trump by 4 percentage points in the latest ABC News Washington Post Ipsos poll, the survey also has Harris 9 points behind Trump on the economy. Republican running mate J.D. Vance says that provides them an opening.
The entire argument of the Kamala Harris campaign boils down to forget how good things were when Donald Trump was president. Forget that we had rising take-home pay. Forget that we had low inflation. Forget that we had peace all over the world.
J.D. Vance was a guest on Fox News Sunday, heard Sundays on Bloomberg Radio. America's top diplomat is on his 9th trip to Israel since the October 7th attacks. Secretary Antony Blinken meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu for more than an hour so far this morning. Blinken on the Gaza ceasefire talks.
This is a decisive moment, probably the best, maybe the last opportunity to get the hostages home, to get a ceasefire, and to put everyone on a better path to enduring peace and security.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken also met with Israeli President Isaac Herzog this morning. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
It's like maybe the one game I'd go back this year and watch first pitch off. I mean, you get Stroman and Skubal they delivered exactly what they were supposed to deliver. No earned runs over 6 innings. Spectacular game. And then the Tigers did it at the end, the Little League Classic, Bowman Field, Williamsport. I mean, this is what it's about, Paul. I mean,
Detroit is
I'm
not
ignoring Barr.
But Michael Barr, Detroit is not terrible.
No, they're not.
They've won
3 games below 500.
Yeah, we're not like White Sox got off.
No, you guys you're only 3 games below 500. Yeah. I mean, you're in it.
Hey, Lisa, what did you think about it?
I was waiting for that. All morning I was waiting for this. All right, you keep glowing, Michael Barr. You keep glowing.
A walk-off in the 10th inning yesterday? Very nice. All right.
It was a nice ribby. I love it.
Yep.
But more importantly, and folks, for those of you internationally, adults like Michael Barr, really serious fans, you look at the series. In the old days, you'd be on the train and you go play 3 or 4 games at a city. Yeah. And Michael Barr, the fact is the Tigers took 2 out of 3 from the Yankees. They're going to remember in the vicinity. In the vicinity, October 5th, they're going to remember that.
By the way, there's chatter where now they're in Major League Baseball thinking about it, where if you are the starting pitcher, you got to go at least 6 innings. They're talking about this idea. Now, we're going to see what's going to happen about it. That's the way it used to be back in the old days.
Oh, boy. I mean, yeah.
Verlander of the Houston Astros, Verlander's leading the charge on this. He's written it up. I mean, he's just out of control.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll have to see. They play Cleveland. They play a team worse than the Tigers.
Exactly.
Cleveland's on a roll. Cleveland gets no love.
Yeah.
Great town.
Western media, Eastern media.
Yep.
They're like, who? And the answer is arguably the best team in baseball. I'm surprised you came in today. I thought,
I almost took the day off.
2 out of 3.
But we're shorthanded, so I'm like, okay, I got to come in. So
it's like because John Tucker, I mean, he gets his 1 week a year.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's too stressful as it is. I'm like, he gets a week off?
I think so. I mean,
I've never done that in my life.
He can't. He's indispensable, John Tucker.
We'll have to see.
Yep.
Anyways, there it is. Detroit 3, Yankees 2. We'll have more on that in our sports report coming up as well. With that talk, we lifted the market. Futures up 3. The VIX 15.65. On YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Traders, starting off the week on this cautious note, the Democratic National Convention kicks off in Chicago. Also, investors look into this week's Fed meeting in Jackson Hole. So right now we have NASDAQ futures up about 8 points, Dow futures down 8 points, S&P futures up about 2. We have the 2-year yield at 4.05%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 3.87%, and that is little change. To currencies, U.S. dollar traded at its weakest level since March. Right now we have the Japanese yen up nearly 1%, 146.31 against the dollar. We have the euro, stronger British pound, stronger Bitcoin, down nearly 3% at 58,000. We do have some deal-making news. Circle K operator Couche-Tard, it's made a bid for 7 & I. That's a Japanese convenience chain, the operator of 7-Eleven. It's now valued at more than $38 billion. We have Couche-Tard down about 0.3 in Canada, 7 & I up about 22% in Japan. And a challenge to NVIDIA. AMD, it's agreed to buy server maker ZT Systems. It's a cash and stock transaction valued at $4.9 billion. AMD right now up about 2%. NVIDIA shares little change. NVIDIA actually opens its books next week. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. I've been waiting for this conversation.
Have you? Okay.
You know, we bring in all these fossils with gray hair.
Exactly.
You know, and they're like, oh, this is like 1987.
Back in my day.
Back in my day. I remember the collapse of the steel strike, 1962. How about somebody newly minted who's actually been a really good student of the history of economics and the history of the market about we've just lived through? Kevin Gordon joins us, senior investment strategist at Charles Schwab, with some deserved academic cred, but also the ute of the industry. What was it like, Paul? What would you say, 8 a.m. that Monday, 2 Mondays ago?
Yeah. Well, where were you?
I was on sabbatical.
Yeah, sabbatical, and that
that
was noted.
I was touring nursing homes. Kevin, what was it like at 8 a.m. on Sunday? Did Saunders have to medicate you?
You know, it's funny. Lizanne was actually on vacation at that time, so it was quite a busy. It was quite a busy.
Tom Keene and Lizanne Saunders
we were
both out.
I said, what a crazy time.
She's not on vacation.
She rarely takes
Led Zeppelin tribute show. Okay, go.
She rarely takes. So it was it was an interesting week. I will say, yes, as scary as Sunday was, as we all learned, Monday, there was an eventual bounce back from the low. Of course, Monday was still rough. I think the biggest takeaway from that period in the episode and what's happened in the price action since is that if you were to look at longer-term breadth metrics for the market, they've basically been unfazed by what has happened. So I view it as it's always easy in hindsight to say a necessary pullback because things had gotten so frothy, especially in the tech sector, because that's where a lot of the selling pressure was, and that was kind of the epicenter of the correction. But I think it's normal to see whenever you have some sort of environment where everything gets so stretched and so one-sided, especially for a sector like tech. And when you start to dig into some of the details, what was really encouraging to me, at least, was that there wasn't as much of a recession signal coming from the market if you look at some of the sector action. Some of the traditional defensives were doing quite well in what they're supposed to do in a correction, but you weren't seeing this epic breakdown of things like financials or industrials or materials, things that you would typically see fall significantly if the market was sending more of a recessionary signal.
Do you guys at Charles Schwab still believe in big tech as a leader in this market?
Yeah, I mean, we have it, rated somewhat favorably in a sector model. I think you have to keep in mind, and what I was, talking a lot about with friends, because, I usually get inundated by my friend group when that happens, like we've had a couple of weeks ago, is tech still a leader? Can it continue to outperform? The way that I kind of turn it is, if you can stomach the volatility, then yeah, I think it makes sense to be in that sector. But if you're going to freak out at a 15% drop, which is what we had in the tech sector from the mid-July peak to the early August trough, then you're not really as much of a risk-tolerant investor. Probably doesn't make sense to be in that sector. But yeah, I think that when you look at the longer-term breadth profile, percentage of companies that are trading above their 200-day moving average, any metric you pick, it still makes sense as I think a long-term play.
What do you guys expect to hear from Jackson Hole later this week from the various economic officials and Fed Chairman Jay Powell? What are you guys looking for?
I think, we've already started to hear it to some extent from other Fed officials. Neil Kashkari, I know, was out this morning with an interview talking about how he has almost definitively shifted his focus from, just the inflation side of their mandate to now almost purely labor.
Okay.
And I think that is becoming, it's been a story for the past, I think, couple of months. Fed officials have been hinting at it, most notably, Austin Goolsbee. But I think that, it's a right pivot to make at this time in terms of what to focus on because, especially when you're dealing with an ex-post Fed that's so data dependent, that's really reliant on just data point by data point. It becomes a lot more important for the labor side of things because most labor data we get are just lagging in nature. I mean, look at the revisions we're going to get for payrolls this Wednesday. That's going to tell us a backward-looking story, and I think that if we catch down a little bit for payrolls to household, that's going to be
the conversation of the week
difficult.
last week was Steve Risciuto at Mizuho, who took this over to the Hicksey and ISLM space.
Oh boy!
And not, it's Monday, folks. My eyes are glazing over already. But the bottom line is Risciuto said, would everybody stop ignoring the Fed parlor game and start looking at the real economy? Liz Ann Saunders and you would say, hey, we just generated good earnings. Can you extrapolate out, Kevin, continued earnings and revenue? Well, not growth, but solidity. Can you frame that out to someone out 1 year, out 3 years?
Yeah, no, I think the general backdrop is solid. And even though we've talked about these K-shaped recoveries that have formed within the economy, where folks at the upper end and the higher end of the income or the wealth spectrum are generally doing better than those at the lower end, I think the benefit that you have, and it sounds probably kind of weird, but the benefit of real rates being as restrictive as they are, but the underlying economy and the fundamentals being relatively solid, is that the Fed has a lot of room to ease here without it being recessionary. So even if they start to get a little bit aggressive with cutting, whether they're spooked by some labor market data or not, I think that as of now, where we stand, whether it's corporate earnings or whether it's the labor market, it would still be them dialing back the aggression and the restrictiveness at a faster pace rather than catching down to the data. And I think a lot of that is clear, even if you look at, yes, the rise in the unemployment rate. I don't want to ignore it, but the fact that it hasn't been driven as much by layoffs and the fact that initial jobless claims are not confirming it, job cut announcements from Challenger are not confirming it. So, I don't want to ignore it, but I want to also recognize the fact that this is a unique cycle. So we can't really treat it like past cycles.
Paul, get one more in here, but Paul, off the gloom. Remember the gloom of the pandemic?
Sure.
I was stuck at a fancy resort in Jamaica going, can we literally get a plane out?
I know.
I was sweating bullets.
Yep.
We're up 23% per year, 149%.
Yep.
From me sitting in a chair in Jamaica looking at the breakfast bill, going, I can't afford this.
I can't afford this. Hey, Kevin, what sectors are screening pretty attractively for you guys these days?
So we still have energy, materials, and financials as outperforms. Okay. I probably have the least amount of conviction for materials just because of the softening in the global commodity picture. It doesn't really, it doesn't sit as well with me. Although you have the offset of maybe a weaker dollar, that probably helps materials to some extent because they've got so much foreign revenue exposure. But, it sort of stems from, or it rests on our conviction that the fact that you're going to see this continuation of rolling recoveries and rolling recessions in the economy, the cyclical parts of the economy that have already gone through the recessions to some extent, but probably get some relief if the Fed starts to ease a little bit as services and labor start to take a little bit of a break. And we've already started to see that. So I think that if that continues, where you don't get the bottom falling out all at once and you don't get this broad-based recession as it would be defined by the NBER, then you probably have some room to move higher for some of those cyclical and traditional value-oriented parts of the market.
Yep. Kevin, thank you. Kevin Gordon with us, Charles Schwab. Nice. This is what I love, folks. I mean, this is when we invented this madness, Lisa and I. When we invented this, it was like two back-to-back guests, Margaret Patel and Kevin Gordon. That's what
solid.
It's about.
Yep.
Give you a good equity start. You're going to
bad.
do a lot of politics as well. Henrietta Treyz, Amory Horton with us on the ballet in Chicago. Paul, weather. Did you get flooding? Seriously?
No, down to shore. We were planning for a rain out yesterday, but it ended up being a beautiful beach day. Unbelievable. And there was nobody on the beach because everybody read the same forecast as everybody else and nobody came. But it ended up being a nice day. But I know a lot of people in the tri-state area just got slammed.
Seriously, Connecticut. I saw video.
I saw amazing. Just water coming from where it should not be coming from.
Yeah. But there it is. And hope that you are safe and sound where you are. As well. Red and green on the screen. Kevin Gordon lifting the market. That's what, he can come back. 15.68. The real yield he mentioned, I look at the 10-year, 1.79%. Elevated. Please stay with us from New York City. We're on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures, little movement. Traders kind of awaiting signs on the scope of potential interest rate cuts from the Federal Reserve. Right now, NASDAQ futures up about 5 points, Dow futures down 2, S&P futures up 2. We have the 2-year yield at 4.05%, little change. The yield on the 10-year 3.87%, and that is little changed. Goldman Sachs, well, it's changing its tune. Economists there lowered the probability of a U.S. recession in the next year to 20% from 25%, and that was after last week's jobless claims and retail sales data. And speaking of retail, tomorrow, Lowe's, they will open their books. Target, Macy's, TJX Companies, the owner of TJ Maxx, Home Goods, Marshalls, they'll report on Wednesday. And shares of Fubo TV, they were up 13%. This is after Fox, Warner Brothers Discovery, and Walt Disney, they were blocked by a judge from launching their streaming sports service 1 week before its rollout. And Bloomberg reporting chocolate prices set to stay high, even with improvements in Africa's cocoa harvest. Farmers, well, they're still coping with disease, climate change, and also low pay. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate it. We're doing Audible here with Henrietta Treyz. Thrilled that she's with us today. She's been a huge help to Bloomberg Surveillance and identifying the trends. Henrietta, I usually start with some, mumbo jumbo in the zeitgeist and that. But I think we have to address that Chicago protests. And the difference is in 1968, after the Tet Offensive, there was clear, visible, the word I use is substantial divisions within America. To you, as a grizzled pro, how narrow is the Palestinian-Israeli debate in the Palestinian protests talked about in Chicago? It's not 1968, is it?
It's definitely not 1968. Thanks for having me, Tom. I think the first thing to note is that the protest is going to be about a mile long. They have moved it away from the convention. I'm sure, I know that the Democrats have anticipated these protests. I think that the biggest area of concern for them is the state of Michigan, which there is a big population, about 300,000 people who are even in the range of focusing on this the way that the protests would suggest. And in general, this is a really small subset of the Democratic voter base. And I don't think that it's going to move the needle in terms of polling or ultimate election outcomes. But it is there. It is present. Kamala Harris is making clear that she stands with Israel, but doesn't have the same baggage that the Biden administration has on this. And I think that's going to help her.
I mean, Paul, the reason I bring this up, besides that, the analog back to 1968, is I'm looking at outside adults like Pew Research Trust,
right,
or the great work at Cook Political Report, what Henrietta does at Veda Partners, Greg Giroux at Bloomberg, and as she mentions, Michigan's unique, okay, but other than that, I can't find a critical mass of protest in America.
No.
I mean, we can protest the Red Sox middle relief.
Exactly.
That's got a bigger support.
Or the Yankees, losing it in the 10th last night.
Interesting.
Henrietta, what would be, or what will be, or what could be a success for the Democrats this week in Chicago?
Honestly, a continuation of the success is maybe talking about the more popular parts of Kamala Harris's economic plan, get that out there into the ether for voters who don't have a strong sense of her policy, to the extent that any concerns about her policy positions are a problem for voters. What we've seen in the polling data so far is that, she's risen anywhere between 5 to 8 points in all of these swing states. So voters aren't really concerned about her policy, and they're very primed to be opposed to Donald Trump, which is why he's lost every election since 2016. So I think getting a little bit of a message out on policy, but not too much, is probably the strategy. Keeping the good energy going. President Biden will speak tonight. We'll keep forward with that. I think there's a lot of folks waiting to see where Michelle Obama comes out. But Barack Obama will be there, Hillary, Bill Clinton. It's just a big rah-rah. Yep. And I expect that polling will continue to reflect the boost that either party gets from a DNC or an RNC, which is 2 to 3 points. And that point basis, once it gets tacked onto the polls next week, is going to be sufficient to put her outside of the margin of error in all of these swing states. And that's a big problem for Trump right now.
How concerned is Donald Trump and, I guess more importantly, the Republican Party at this point?
Very concerned, from House members who were hoping to pick up all 10 of the toss-up races in the House of Representatives The senators that are not in Ohio and Montana are really concerned. And then at the top of the ticket, I think you can see it from the change up that they're doing at the campaign staff. I think maybe they finally seized on a campaign message trying to tie Kamala Harris to her economic policies that she rolled out on Friday. But one thing I'd really point out there, and where I'm spending some time digging into the data, is that when inflation was 9%, a month later, Democrats went on to keep House Republicans to the lowest majority wins of any minority party in 100 years. So I don't know that the inflation stuff is going to beat out all the rest of it. And that's what history has suggested in the midterms and the 2020 general.
What do we vote? I mean, I know we don't vote on foreign policy, but do we vote on border debates, immigration debates? Do you buy the cliche it's all about economics?
Man, it's really tough because 2020 was not about economics.
Yeah.
I think that Biden narrowly won because of COVID and because of President Trump's response to COVID at the time and sort of the chaos of that administration. And then in 2022, as I suggested, I mean, inflation was 7, 8, 9% that summer, just a month before the actual election. And Democrats somehow still held the United States Senate, which was shocking. So I think voters are quick to say that it's the economy. It's perpetually the number one issue. Inflation is right up there, but it's followed very closely by immigration and abortion. And turnout is really the name of the game. The gender gap is where you should probably pay attention to that issue.
Give us a window into Florida politics. I read Cook Political Report. Amy and David had a really interesting study of, I think it was 5 of the districts, including the tippy tip of Western Florida where Getz is. But give us the red-blue Henrietta Treyz view on a key state like Florida.
It's funny, you're speaking my language. I was just in Seaside last week with where Matt Gaetz' dad lives in his district. So I feel you. There's a lot of Trump supporters down there. It's very MAGA nation. There's buildings with huge billboards and property owners willing to pay the fees for having political propaganda up year round. I mean, it is definitely a little insular world right there. But Florida, look at Rick Scott, the senator there who has poured money into his campaign. I believe the latest campaign donation he gave to his own cycle was over $100 million. And he has an underwater approval rating with both Republicans and Democrats in the state. And of course, as you know, in Duval County, in the Jacksonville area where my parents live, you have a Democratic surge in the down ballot races and the mayoral candidates, et cetera. So I think Kamala Harris is trying to spook Republicans into spending a lot of money in Florida. I think that's a smart strategy. And that's the goal right now, is just make Republicans play defense in that state.
Henrietta Treyz, I'm sure we'll talk to you later this week. Thank you so much for your commitment to the show, the value add from Veda Partners. As well, we had a Mad Max weekend at the house.
Really?
And it harkened back, Paul, to what you've been so good upon, which is the effect of theaters in water cooler.
Yeah.
I have no recollection of the water cooler of the most profitable movie ever made. Mad Max, in today's dollars, cost something like $2.4 million. Bare bone, indie budget, Australian. I watched it last night because somebody in the family hadn't seen it. And it brought in $100 million.
Yeah.
It was basically 50 to 1.
Yeah.
Whatever turnout.
So sure.
And the new movie, which we watched, the chess girl from Netflix.
Yeah.
Oh, Furiosa.
Yeah, Furiosa. Yeah, thank you.
Wow, look at you, Lisa.
Took in
God.
It cost $168 million, and it only so far has taken in $172 million.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what you talk about every day.
Sure.
The profitability of the old days.
Yeah, the profitability of the old days. You made money in the theater, and then you made money, maybe putting it on a disc or a tape or something like that, and you made money
But you
there.
made money right from the get-go if it was successful.
Sure, absolutely.
Furiosa, I don't think it's a success.
Right.
Because it cost $168 million to make, and
then you had another
broke
100.
even.
Yeah, exactly. $160 million to make. You know what? You had to market it. Another $160 million to market it.
That's not in that value. I see that statistic.
Yeah. So.
Why do they do that?
Yes. No. It's now you've hit upon it, Tom. Hollywood accounting, movie accounting is the worst accounting in the world, and that's why you got all these actors saying, "Hey, wait a minute, my movie made a ton of money. How come I'm not getting paid?"
Right. So I thought Yankees accounting was the worst, where they depreciate the relief pitchers, and you saw on the phone with his agent.
Yeah, I know.
He's interviewing to be pitching coach of the New York.
He wants to be the general manager of the Yankees.
Fascinating. I'm absolutely fascinated by where we were, where this independent movie that no one watched, that was a huge success.
Right.
No buzz, and then now massive buzz, and it breaks even. The Sweeney world is bizarre.
No.
With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. This is a crucial week in the presidential race. The Democratic National Convention gets underway today in Chicago. We get more on what to expect with Bloomberg News senior editor Bill Ferries.
Top of the priority list for the Harris campaign, I think, is to keep wringing more momentum out of what's been a pretty extraordinary month. And typically candidates can do that with the convention. 4 days of high-profile speeches, starting with President Biden's speech on Monday evening and culminating with Vice President Harris on Thursday.
Bloomberg's Bill Ferries. With Kamala Harris at the convention this week, former President Donald Trump is set to barnstorm swing states with stops in Pennsylvania, Michigan, North Carolina, and Arizona. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Tel Aviv making a new push for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. The secretary meeting with Israeli President Isaac Herzog this morning.
I know this is a fraught moment in Israel with deep concern about the possibility of attacks coming from Iran, coming from Hezbollah and other sources. And as you heard the president say, the United States has taken decisive action to deploy forces here to deter any attacks and, if necessary, to defend against any attacks.
Secretary Blinken said it is now the best, maybe the last opportunity to conclude a deal that would end the fighting. Blinken later met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem. Ukrainian local authorities have issued a mandatory evacuation order for families with children from the eastern city of Pokrovsk, where 53,000 people still live. They say Russian forces are advancing so quickly that it is compulsory for families to leave the city and other nearby towns. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Michael Barr. Dollar dynamics. There were some really brilliant moments last week on this, Paul, and I think it's sort of the litmus paper of the global system, and we'll judge Jackson Hole. We'll have to see how that goes, but with a 102 DXY, yen 146.18, it's going to be interesting to see where they are Monday. After Jackson Hole.
After Jackson Hole, exactly. And again, I think most folks, are looking for the Fed to just kind of confirm kind of where I think the trend is. A lot of the market thinks the trend is, Tom, which is we'll get some type of rate cut in September. It's at 25 basis points or 50 basis points. But I think most of the market is discounting here the beginning of a rate cutting cycle.
I think he can. It's what he can't say. He can't talk about the polarized America. It's an election year. We're really getting into the heart of the race with the DNC. He'll be speaking 12 hours after the ending of the Anne Marie Horton show in Chicago.
Exactly.
And Joe Matthew hadn't slept in 3 days.
No.
But he's going to speak right after it, and he can't talk about the haves and have-nots of America. Here's a statistic on Wyoming: 48.7% of households receiving SNAP have children.
Really?
They're a richer state than the national average.
Right.
No surprise there. You fly in. It
Sure.
looks like Davos at Jackson Hole
Yep.
with all the Gulf Streams lined up. We can barely find a place to park. And the answer is that's a mirage of their food poverty, their food insecurity in Wyoming.
Yep.
Is way above national average.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to the issue we've seen it over the last several election cycles, the disparity in income, disparity of wealth in this country has been
He
notable.
can't address that. It's an election year.
Yeah.
He's got to steer clear of that. Futures up a big 2. It's got an August Monday feel. We need to fix this. Lisa Mateo is going to fix the boredom of this Monday. It's not going to happen on this show. Newspapers coming up. From New York, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures pretty much treading water as the market focuses in on Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where Fed Chair Jay Powell is set to speak on Friday. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 3 points, Dow futures down 4 points, S&P futures up about a point. We have the 2-year yield, 4.05%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 3.87%, and that is little change. To commodities, oil declined for the 4th time in 5 sessions. Right now, we have Brent crude $79 a barrel, WTI crude $76 a barrel. Over to currencies, the dollar weaker, Japanese yen up about 1% at 146.19 against the dollar. We have the euro, British pound stronger. Bitcoin, though, down more than 2.5% at 58,000. And Tom, since you talked about the box office before, the Associated Press says thanks to hits like Deadpool, Wolverine, and It Ends With Us, the weekend was actually 30% ahead of the same period last year. This weekend, you had Disney's Alien Romulus. That topped the box office with more than $108 million internationally. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Paul, might we remember that over the last 10 years, Costco has delivered a 23% per year return?
Nice. It's
How
solid.
do they do that?
I don't. I think when I think about that business, I think super low margins, but you got to crank it out with volume, and maybe that gets you where you need to go. But I mean,
just unit sales.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, free cash flow hasn't grown that much. The margin, are you ready? It's like a grocery store back before cosmetics.
Yep.
They make 2.8 cents
That is a tough
on the
business.
dollar. Their EBITDA margin for you CFA, people are cramming for the CFA this weekend.
Are they? Okay.
I'm in Central Park. People got Fabosi out reading it in Central Park. What's that about? EBITDA margins under 5%.
Yep.
This is like Graham Dodd and Cottle.
Exactly.
I mean, this income statement.
And you just crank it out on the top line. I mean, a compounded annual return over the last 5 years, 28%.
Yeah.
S&P, 15%.
And the multiple, are you ready? It's got like a luxury stock multiple, a 54. A 54 multiple.
Wow.
That's like, Hermes, LVMH, and the rest of them.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't get it. It's amazing. How about we continue this conversation?
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
And the front page is the Lisa Mateo Hour. It's brought to you by IBKR. With Interactive Brokers Forecast Trader, you can trade your views on key economic and climate indicators. Visit ibkr.com/forecast and get started. You're actually prepared today, Lisa, because you didn't visit Costco this weekend.
I didn't.
Right?
I saved myself $500. That's what I did. So yeah, summertime. There's not much going on. I broke a sweat looking for newspaper stories this morning. Okay, but this one stood out to me. This was in the New York Times. You know, around New York City, we have the horse-drawn carriages, right? All over New York City.
Love them.
Yes, everybody loves them, but there's controversy behind them. You know, you have the animal
others
activists.
Disagree with
others
me.
disagree, right? So in Brussels, they're actually switching to electric drawn carriages instead of the horse-drawn carriages. They became the first European capital to do this, offer those daily tours. And the carriage operators, they're telling the Times that they're just tired of getting these angry remarks from tourists about animal cruelty. A lot of them are selling the horses, using that profit to buy electric carriages. They say, hey, now they don't have to pay the high cost of taking care of the horses. They also don't have to worry about canceling tours because it's too hot for the horses. And they're saying they're getting just as many people signing up for the electric cars as the horse-drawn cars.
I can't disagree with that. I mean, I was fortunate enough to live in the varied climes where I could hear the horses clip, clop, clip, clop. And in my, idiot Victorian fantasy, it was wonderful. But why not?
Yeah.
Why not have an electric?
We still have them in New York, right? We still have the horse-drawn.
Yes, we still have the horse-drawn carriage.
I didn't know that.
We still have them in the city. I actually, long story short, I got engaged on one of the horse-drawn carriages in New York City.
Oh, that is perfect.
And the marriage survived?
And 25 years
later.
Oh, my word. Paul, we should be taking notes.
Oh, boy.
Next, quickly.
Okay, Wall Street Journal. They were talking about how these discount airlines like Spirit and Frontier, they're now offering a lot of these bundle packages. They're calling it, one flyer called it the poor man's first class. So they have all these different packages where you can pay one price to get like in-flight Wi-Fi, your checked bags for free, extra legroom, cocktails, priority boarding. So this is the way that they're trying to get more people because it's getting so competitive out there. So they're trying to do these bundle packages. Like for $100, you could get this. They have a business bundle. They have a Go Big bundle that'll cost you maybe $200 extra to include all these things. So they want to be a little bit more transparent too. That's the other thing.
Where are airfares these days in general? I've not booked a flight in like forever, so I'm not even sure where airfares are. I mean, I know Tom prices JFK to Paris daily. But, I mean,
but they're saying that's the reason.
It's competitive out there.
The regular airlines are starting to drop their prices, and now these discount carriers are saying, well, we got to do something.
Funny you should ask. I had to do a Paris, New York thing this weekend for one of the offspring. And I was surprised now there's economy, like bare bones economy, you're taking, a little bag on, and then a substantial markup to like have a suitcase. Mm-hmm. So that's that a la carte thing going on.
It's just crazy.
It's crazy.
It is crazy.
I don't get it, but that's the new level.
I'm flying to Dublin next month, and it's not business. It's the first time I've gone to Europe, not business first class in like my lifetime. I don't know how this is going to go, but we'll have to see.
It's going to be good. It's going to be good.
Yeah.
So we had talked about Disney, right, revealing their plans for theme parks. So now Universal Destinations, they're the theme park business owned by Comcast.
Yep.
They've acquired like 500 acres as a potential site for Europe's largest theme park.
Really?
So they're saying, they're talking with UK officials about tax, other infrastructure incentives. But sources saying Comcast could look into other sites in Europe, elsewhere in the world, but they're saying it could bring a lot of significant money, also a lot of jobs to the area. So it's interesting kind of coming and expanding in Europe.
I'd say the theme park business for both Disney and Universal, which are owned by Comcast, as you mentioned, Lisa, they're getting huge investments. I mean, Disney's going to put in, I think, like $60 billion over the next 10 years just in the theme park and cruise business, launching boats and new theme parks. And Comcast doing the same thing. It's a good business.
Is your radar up on that?
Yeah.
To me, it's everybody's on board.
Everybody's kind of on board, but these are the two biggest players in the world, Comcast and Disney. So, but people are spending, on these types of things.
Jonathan emails, and thank you, Jonathan, for your interest in the show. How does Costco deliver 24% returns? Lisa Mateo.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
Right. Next.
I'm not sure if you noticed during some of the preseason football games, but some of them are wearing those Guardian caps.
Oh, yeah. What are
so
those?
The padded, they put it over the helmet, so it's more added protection.
It's protection.
So it's protection, extra protection. So the difference why you're seeing it now is because the NFL said that some players there can wear them during the preseason games. But a lot of players now are saying, hey, we might wear these during the regular season. So that's kind of the talk going on now is should these helmets be worn during the regular season games? Because now, since they said they can wear them during the preseason, there was one Colts safety, Rodney Thomas II. He tells the Washington Post, you know what? I might do it. I might start wearing these during the regular season games.
Those head injuries, it's extraordinary. And they're just long-lasting, long-term. I don't know how they deal with it. I mean, I know they've been making advances with these helmet technologies for seemingly forever, but I guess you can't be too careful, I guess.
I personally, I had a concussion in hockey when I was like 7 years old. I remember it clear as a bell with a baloney helmet on. But there was a thing called a Cooper SK20, and the few NHL players that actually wore a helmet at the time were not maligned, but it was not manly to do it. J.C. Tremblay of the Montreal Canadiens was an early adopter, and many others. And I'm sure Rich knows someone on the Rangers. And the answer is now we look back and it's just foolish.
Yep.
I mean, could you imagine the game now? I mean, the game is different. The high sticking is different than it used to be because you could really hurt someone. But why not wear some poofy cushion thing on your head?
Yeah, well, some players say they don't like the look, the feel. It could affect their performance. That's the other side of it.
Yeah, we've had in my family some experience with concussions, and I was shocked to learn how much doctors don't know about concussions.
Yeah.
They really don't. I mean, they kind of go in there, and this could last a week. It could last a lifetime. I'm like, that's it? That's what you got for us?
Good morning to Jeff up in Connecticut, who I skated with. He's done very well in Connecticut in business, and he had to stop playing hockey at 20 years old. I mean, that's all there is to it. That's the reality. Stuff. Good morning to all you parents out there struggling with this, trying to make the right decisions. Lisa Mateo, in honor of Michael Barr, he was going to take it off. Detroit, and you got to start with Mr. Seager. Detroit 2, Yankees 1.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo getting started on a Monday. Red and green trying to lift. Green moments ago, but just a churn here, a Monday morning churn. Maybe looking forward to the events, the politics of Chicago. We'll talk about that. Joe Matthew, Kaylee lines out there for balance of powers and all. And Jackson Hole coming up later in the week. Many people saying non-event. We'll see. Could be of interest as well. And, economic data will slide in there. I haven't even looked at ECO Go, Paul. Yeah. Let's do that. We can do that on the Bloomberg Professional Servers. And, there's some data coming up here. Existing home sales, new home sales, durable goods, people making a big deal about inventory. There it is.
Initial jobless claims coming up on Thursday as well here. So we'll have to see, Tom. But I think the focus probably this week is going to be with you and Lisa and Michael McKee out in Jackson Hole. Kind of what we're going to hear from the world's economists, most notably Fed Chairman Jay Powell.
He's going to say nothing. He's going to just try to get through it and say the least he can. Now we got green on the screen. Futures up 2 right now. We've got a wonderful guest here to get started for Global Wall Street. Patrick Armstrong with us in moments from the Interactive Broker Studios. Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we've got little movement in futures following Wall Street's best week since November. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 3 points, Dow futures down a point, S&P futures up 2 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.04%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 3.86%, and that's down 1 basis point. Not much on the economic calendar for today. We do have the Conference Board. They'll issue their index of leading economic indicators for July, but all eyes really looking toward Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Fed Chair Jay Powell set to speak on Friday. Now, meanwhile, the Fed's Mary Daly told the Financial Times she has more confidence that inflation is under control. And Neil Kashkari tells the Wall Street Journal he would be open to a September rate cut on a weaker jobs market. Today, we'll hear from the Fed's Christopher Waller. Let's take a look at commodities. We have spot gold lower, $2,494 an ounce. Oil falling. We have Brent crude at $79 a barrel. WTI crude $76 a barrel. Shares of Estee Lauder, they're falling. Their ADR down about 4%. Profit outlook missed estimates. The company also announced its CEO plans to retire at the end of June of 2025. And Kroger holding investor calls starting today as it weighs a new bond sale. Kroger shares, well, they're up about 0.3%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much. Patrick Armstrong writes beautifully. I love his work in the Financial Times and, of course, with Plurimi Wealth. And we're thrilled to get Jonas today because his note that he sends, his research note, is hugely informative, and particularly on long short, on the individual stock selection behind a Patrick Armstrong conviction. Patrick, let's start with one story stock. For anybody of a certain vintage in America, it's one of the great debacles in America, and that is Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing. You're going long 3M. Why are you the only one on the planet who believes in 3M?
Well, I don't know if I'm the only one on the planet, but it's a change we've made just at the beginning of this month. It's a stock that was down at 14 times earnings when we added it. You're comparing that to a market at 15 times or 20 times earnings almost. And I've got a pro-cyclical outlook. 3M's a beneficiary of that. 3M's still an innovative company as far as industrials go. And I think that's the price that we felt comfortable to add it on. So if you're not worried about a recession, I think industrials offer you that economic exposure. The multiple 3M trades at, we were very happy to add it at the beginning of the month at the price we did.
Paul, compare and contrast Costco up 23% per year for the last 10 years. Wow. Minnesota Mining, I love saying this.
Yes, I know.
It's like, it's like Dow equivalent. Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing up 4% per year for the last 10 years.
Tom, did you know that our guest here, Patrick, is from Regina, Saskatchewan? I had to go Google Maps. Regina, thank you. Halfway between.
Ari to the rescue there. I had no idea.
How do you know that, Ari?
Ari, I had a guy in my hockey team once with no teeth from Regina.
Regina. It is halfway between Calgary and Winnipeg. north of like Montana and North Dakota. I mean, holy cow. We need to do remote from there, Tom. That's all there's to it. So, Patrick, let's get back to it here. How do you think about what's going to lead this market higher, do you think? What do you think is going to be some of the support for this market higher?
So you've got politics, you've got populist promises from the Trump side and from the Harris side. I think that's going to create some confidence for whoever is going to win. There's going to be promises that are probably going to be stimulative for the economy in the short term anyway. You're also getting the beginning of a cutting cycle from the Fed. It's a question of how much they're going to cut. I don't think it's 50 basis points is needed, but we will see the beginning of a cutting cycle from the Fed and a continuation of just broad strength in the U.S. consumer. You've got a fully employed consumer who's getting wage growth that's still outstripping inflation. That should fuel discretionary spending.
My heart of the soul, this came up last week a couple of times. It's something I've been trumpeting for well in excess of 2 years. It's not an original thought. But Patrick Armstrong, you've led the charge on this. Corporations will adapt. In what way are they going to adapt forward? Is it use of technology, or is there a different Armstrong feel?
Well, technology, so AI has been the big theme since March last year in markets, and you are starting to see companies improving maybe productivity with that for the first time. Wal-Mart really stressed that in their results that came out last week. They had really good numbers, and they talked about the productivity of their associates, inventory management, using AI in there. So I think companies always use technology that's available. The companies that implement it better than others are the winners, and the companies that don't are going to be the laggards. So the AI trade, we think, has legs. It'll expand beyond just the NVIDIA, but companies starting to implement it and use it, improve productivity. That's something that humanity's always done, is innovation leads to new successes, and I don't think that's going to change. So innovation, capitalism rewards it, and that incentive structure remains in place.
Patrick, in fixed income, what are we doing here? Do we sit in a 2-year treasury at 4%, or do we try to take some credit risk here?
I'm comfortable with credit risk at the high end. Credit spreads are pretty narrow across the board. Where you're getting the best pickup, I think, is senior bonds from banks. You do get a little bit of risk premium in financials because people have memories of 2008 and recently seeing some banks go under last year. You do get a bit of a pickup there. I don't think you want to be in fixed income to get rich. So fixed income should be trying to beat inflation, preserve your capital, and you're doing that quite comfortably with a AA rated bank debt.
You're constructive on Nvidia. Let's go broader. 7 stocks. Tell us where Patrick Armstrong is. Your conviction on Mag 7.
So I own 4 of them right now. I own Nvidia. I own Alphabet. I don't think there's going to be much regulation there. I think it's a bit of rhetoric, and I don't think the U.S. government will really want to put in place regulations that are going to destroy the power of the Magnificent Seven companies, because you need that to compete against China. You need that to compete against the rest of the world. You want to have a strong tech sector in the United States. So the big risk with these companies are something from the regulation side of things that changes their business model, and I don't think that's going to happen. So I also own Amazon, a play into the U.S. consumer, a play into cloud as well. I don't own Tesla, don't own Apple right now either.
Hugely valuable. Patrick Armstrong, thank you so much with Parimi. Again, folks, don't send us a note because you want Patrick's note. Can you do me a favor? We protect the copyright of all of our guests. Get his wonderful note from Plurimi at Capital. I really can't say enough about it, where he lays out in each sector, like healthcare,
long, short.
He'll have like 7, 8 stocks, and it'll be long 3 and short 4, whatever, whatever the mix is well. That's like Yankees relief pitching, where maybe you're long 1 and short 9.
Yeah,
would be
exactly.
more like it. Do you think Michael Barr noticed we played Bob Seger at the end of the hour?
Do you think he noticed that? I don't know.
Well, he's got his intern. He's in his interns meeting.
A lot of good rock and roll coming out of Detroit over the years.
Yeah, well, we'll do. We got Martha teed up. You got to. You can't do Detroit without Martha. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, and Lisa. The Democratic Party reintroduces itself to the nation this week with a convention that opens today. The 4-day gathering in Chicago is designed to strengthen Vice President Kamala Harris as President Joe Biden's replacement. Biden will give the keynote address tonight. Bloomberg's Laura Davison has more from the Windy City.
It will be sort of a look back, a legacy-defining speech for him. You know, of course, just a month ago, this whole week was supposed to be a party for him, and now he's the speaker on the first night, and then we'll be departing the event to shift the attention onto Kamala Harris and Tim Walz and sort of the next direction for the Democratic Party. So this is a real change in vibe. You know, the organizers of the event say that there's been much more demand in the past month, both from media, from attendees, as well as celebrities who are expected to attend the event.
Bloomberg's Laura Davison at the DNC in Chicago. Meanwhile, hundreds of Republicans held a rally at a fairground in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. This pastor attended the pro-Trump rally at the McHenry County Fairgrounds in Woodstock, Illinois.
It's our opportunity to stand for the principles and policies that we believe will make America better.
Donald Trump is planning an aggressive schedule this week that will see him visit the U.S.-Mexico border and hold rallies in 4 key swing states. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the time is now to conclude a Gaza ceasefire agreement that would return hostages held by Hamas back to Israel and bring relief to Palestinian civilians. Blinken said it is now the best, maybe the last opportunity to conclude a deal that would end the fighting.
I'm here as part of an intensive diplomatic effort on President Biden's instructions to try to get this agreement to the line and ultimately over the line. It is time for it to get done.
Blinken spoke as he met with Israeli President Isaac Herzog in Tel Aviv before talks with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Question came up this weekend. Now what for Paris? I mean, they had the Olympics. Everybody went home. It's 104 degrees, whatever. I haven't even looked at the weather today, but like every other city that's done the Olympics, there's got to be some kind of massive letdown after it all.
Well, I mean, think about it. I mean, you have the worldwide sporting event there.
And they delivered.
And yes, they did. And with the backdrop of the Eiffel Tower, I mean, everything was just going great. So, yeah, now it's like, all right, back to the cafe. And that's
Paris.
it.
I mean, Paris, it's always there.
I priced the planes. I did not think they were cheap. I'm delivered an offspring deep in economy. I mean, she's back in row 3.
Okay.
And and the answer is, I thought it'd be $300-400, and it's like it's the $700 trip. Which I'm like, you're kidding me? No way. I stand corrected. I said it'd be 104 today in Paris. It's lovely. It's in the 70s.
Oh, perfect.
Perfect for a road trip.
Exactly. I think
a little dash over to Paris.
Go over there.
Good as well. We're getting ready for Jackson Hole, which means we're looking at what matters. Do you think gold comes up at Jackson Hole? I don't think so.
Does Bitcoin come up at Jackson Hole? Off 2.3% here, $58,000 per token, Tom.
But that's like churning, right?
It's churning.
58.60.
Yeah. You know who's joining me in the 11 o'clock hour? Matt Miller.
In the 11 o'clock
hour,
no
Matt
kidding.
Miller. Yes. TV star.
Do you have to send out for like lunch for his interns?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it's all taken care of. It's all taken care of. Yep.
They all, you go to his interns, and you go, "What do you want from Subway?" And he goes, "Steak, steak, 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 steak."
No Subway. They went.
That's the way they roll.
Bringing it in.
Okay, Matt Miller in the 11 o'clock hour. That's cool.
That?
I'll be deep in his surveillance nap. Red and green on the screen. The VIX 15.64. Gold, as I mentioned, really something. 25.32. 25.32 on GCA. From New York, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Traders starting the week on a cautious note. We have the DNC. That kicks off in Chicago. Also, investors looking to this week's Fed meeting in Jackson Hole. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures up about 15 points. Dow futures up about 8. S&P futures up about 4. We have the 2-year yield at 4.04%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 3.86%, and that's down 2 basis points. To currencies, the dollar traded at its weakest level since March. Right now, Japanese yen up 1% and 146.06 against the dollar. The euro, British pound stronger. Bitcoin down nearly 2.5% at 58,000. Some deal-making news. This isn't a challenge to NVIDIA. AMD agreed to buy server maker ZT Systems. It's a cash and stock transaction valued at $4.9 billion. We have AMD up about 2%. NVIDIA up about 0.2%. NVIDIA actually opens its books next week. And Circle K operator Couche-Tard has made a bid for 7 & I. That's a Japanese convenience store chain operator of 7-Eleven, now valued at more than $38 billion. We have 7 & I up about 22% in Japan. Couche-Tard down about 0.3% in Canada. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. This is a joy, and I think it's only happening because it's the 7th week of August. And we have an opening in his incredibly deserved and busy calendar. Gautam Mukunda is with Yale by way of a school up in Cambridge and a few other academic excellences along the way, and has been persistent in writing excellence. One of his books, and yes, full disclosure, I haven't read it cover to cover. It is on my reading list as we dash into this frenzy of an election season. Picking presidents, how to make the most consequential decision in the world. I'm just going to cut to it. Chapter 2, Harry Truman and the System at its Best. Professor, how do we get Milwaukee, Chicago, and get to November 5th as a system at its best?
Tom, first, I'm blushing at the introduction, so thank you very much. I appreciate it.
It's my only one this week. Everybody else sucks, but continue.
So the system at its best means that it's a system that it looks at the problems and threats that the country is facing.
Wait a minute. We got to stop the show. He's teaching at Yale, but he's got a Harvard pin on. Have you noticed that? That's like un-American. Continue.
So there is a story behind this, and it's a gift from one of my best friends and one of the person I most admire of anyone I've ever met. So I always wonder.
Okay.
So I'll just know, right? So it's a system that's looking at the challenges and saying, hey, who can we find who can deal with this? So in Harry Truman's case, there's this hidden history of how it happened, right? So Truman becomes president because Roosevelt dies. And the Democratic Party knew that Franklin Roosevelt was not going to make it through his next term. That was not in question. Everybody was close to him knew that. And Henry Wallace was his vice president. And Henry Wallace had a lot of virtues, but he was a man of the left, of the far left, and the Democratic Party elites thought this guy cannot handle Joseph Stalin. It was very clear. This is not going to work. And they essentially forced him off the ticket. So it is, in a real sense, the closest parallel to what we saw with Joe Biden recently, right? Democratic Party elites, in this case, a president, pushed him off the ticket. So people sort of say this is, Republicans are making their critique, it's undemocratic, things like that. One is, it's historic. Like, this is how American politics work, with parties selecting nominees. There's nothing new about this. We're going back to a system that worked pretty well when it produced the Harry Trumans and Franklin Roosevelts and Abraham Lincolns of the world. But the other way to think about this, right, is it's a system it's more flexible than we thought. So if you had asked me 6 months ago, is the Democratic Party functional enough to say we do not have a candidate who can win this election and we're going to swap him out for someone who we think has a shot? My answer would have been no. Mm-hmm. And I think most people's answer would have been no. And so what we're seeing here is, surprising, and it's good to see parties have the strength to put their judgment. Democracy works best when it's filtered, right? When it works with experts and with elites who can make judgments that not all of us are close up to enough to presidential candidates to make.
What do you make of the Republican Party on the other side of this equation here? What happened to the Republican Party that everybody grew up with?
So I have a paper about this that I've been dying to publish, and I've written. So you like hit a trigger for me, right? This is something I've been thinking about for a long time, and this is perfect for Bloomberg. The Republican Party got disrupted. And I don't mean that in the sort of way that we use the word disruption all the time. Mm-hmm. I mean in the very dictionary definition of Clayton Christensen's disruptive innovation theory. So Clay was my mentor. He was the guy who recruited me to Harvard Business School, and I love finding new ways to apply his theories, right? So if you think about Republican Party politics since Ronald Reagan, think about it as policies, as two groups of people, elite donors and mass Republicans. Elite donors care a lot about lower taxes and deregulation. If you poll Republicans, like Republican voters, they don't actually care that much about that, especially now. You know, maybe during the Reagan era when taxes were much higher, but now that doesn't get a lot of traction. So what you see, right, is if you want to get elected for a long time, you needed the support of donors. And they cared a lot about things that the mass Republican didn't really care about. Mm-hmm. So you run essentially, right? You get the nomination by, gesturing in the form of social conservatism, things like that. And then you'd govern for the donors. This was, what was George W. Bush's signature domestic policy achievement? A massive tax cut. Donald Trump was the first candidate who didn't need support from the donors. He is, whatever else you can say about him, he is a genius for earned media, right? There's never been anyone like him for that. And so when he was able to do that, he essentially said, I'm going to give the average Republican something that looks kind of like what they want. We forget in 2016 how he ran.
Just because of time, I've got to ask this, and I say it with great respect for your academics, and I won't mince words. Clay Christensen was a huge supporter of what I do. I'm thrilled to say he dragged you to Harvard. Why can't America elect a woman? I guess we're trying to, again, for or against, I get it. But when you look at the global ascent of women in politics, what is it about America?
So my guess is it's, to some extent, a self-created fear. So there's a wisdom in sort of party elites on both parties that women take a big hit, that they can't get elected, and so they don't foster women candidates. They're blocked. It's harder to get the nomination if you're a woman. I'll say the political science empirics don't support that. They actually do not suggest that the hit that you take from being a woman or something is all that high. This seems to be something that the parties have convinced themselves of. And if it's not true, we're about to find out. And, we sort of forget Hillary Clinton lost, but Donald Trump drew an inside straight on the Electoral College. Mitt Romney did better in the popular vote in 2012 than Donald Trump did in 2016.
How should our listeners and viewers and your students at Yale watch modern cable TV, given they're trying to be adults and read Alan Nevins on Truman and Grover Cleveland and all the rest of it? Paul, to me, I'm fascinated by this.
Yep.
How do you synthesize this modern mania we have?
Wow, Tom, that's sort of the we have a news environment. Listen, it's actually gone back to the past, right? The Spanish-American War. It was Joseph Pulitzer who said,
I strongly agree with this. Continue.
Yeah. You provide the pictures, and I'll provide the war. So what we're seeing is an ideological slant to media that is not. We sort of say it was actually cyclical. It's come back to what it was. If you read newspapers from the late 19th century, early 20th century, they were just as partisan as Fox News is today.
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing is people have to relearn the media consumption reflexes that they had in that era. And, many of them won't. What we sort of see is most people vote the party line. Most people who say they're independents vote their party line. So the idea that we've all ever existed in this kind of sort of Socratic state where we're having rational discussions about politics, I'm not sure that was ever true. I think it's actually the job of our system to kind of figure out ways to make it work without asking people to do something that there's just no historical evidence they've ever done.
Joy, don't be a stranger. We'll do it by Zoom, whatever, carrier pigeon, semaphore flag, whatever. Gautam Mukunda, the book is picking presidents, but far is just total academics thinking about the American political system. Paul, I'm a huge believer that the quietude of our political debate, say coming out of World War II, up to a certain point, was the aberration. And as the professor mentions, we've just reverted back to where we were.
Yep.
Years ago.
We'll see from the Democrats in Chicago this week.
Yeah, it's
That's their
fascinating
time in the
to
spotlight.
see. Can't say enough about picking presidents, how to make the most consequential decision in the world. To be direct, it is timely. Mukunda lifting the markets, futures up 6 from New York City. Stay with us, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Not much movement in futures. Traders kind of awaiting signs on the scope of potential interest rate cuts from the Federal Reserve. We have NASDAQ futures up about 0.1%, 26 points. Dow futures up about 11 points. S&P futures up about 0.1%, or 5 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.04%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 3.86%, and that's down 2 basis points. Goldman Sachs changing its tune. Economists there lowered the probability of a U.S. recession in the next year to 20% from 25%. That was after last week's jobless claims and also retail sales data. And speaking of retail, tomorrow, Lowe's will open its books with Target, Macy's, TJX Companies, the owner of TJ Maxx, Home Goods, and Marshalls. That takes place on Wednesday. And shares of Fubo TV, they are up 14%. This is after Fox, Warner Brothers Discovery, Walt Disney, they were blocked by a judge from launching their streaming sports service. And this is taking place 1 week before its rollout. And you have shares of HP, they're lower, down about 2% after a downgrade from Morgan Stanley. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. I don't know if it's my chart of the year. I don't think it is, but it's a wow chart. And we do this for the WOW fixed income strategist. Kelsey Berro joins us, Executive Director Fixed Income at JPMorgan. Thrilled she's with us today. Your arch call with Bob Michael is yields are coming in. 10-year yield, you're talking below. I mean, Ian Lincoln's out there and then other strategists with calls. But the basic idea is we come down. Paul, I'm looking at the corporate chart. Yield to worst back to Volcker. It's the great moderation. The great disinflation. We're out 3 standard deviations right now, folks, which means we've never been here. And a regression to the mean, Kelsey Berro, just gets your price up, yield down. Is that all JP Morgan's talking about? Is a regression to a great moderation mean?
So I'm looking at the same chart you are in terms of investment grade
yields
right now. We're the only 2
people that have access to it, folks.
5%, right? A yield to maturity on the investment grade index right now. I think what's amazing about that, and that's come down pretty significantly, from the highs, was above 6%. Yeah. That's actually still in the 80th percentile of the last 10 years.
On this show, we call that 3 standard deviations.
Right, another way of saying it. So, I think the big question people are asking now is, have we missed the move? Because, we're now 13 months from the last rate hike. And if you look at 1 to 5 year credit, for example, that's about 200 basis points ahead of cash right now. And the Fed hasn't even started cutting rates. But we also know that the market is pricing in a significant amount of rate cuts, 8 to 9 rate cuts. So, the question is, what's the risk reward from here? Now, there's 2 tails that I'm thinking about. One is the reacceleration risk. One is the risk that we go into a harder landing. I think what the data has been telling us more recently, we can debate about the risk of recession, the risk of rolling over. The data is very mixed on that. But the one place where it's really clear is that the reacceleration tail risk has come down quite a lot. And that's really the big risk for bond investors. And that's the good news for fixed income, is that we've really been able to credibly reduce that tail risk of a reacceleration in inflation.
So if I'm the Fed, I go out to Jackson Hole with all the the mucky mucks end of this week, including Mr. Tom Keene. What do I say?
I don't think you really need to say that much. It's really interesting. You think about the price action this year, and it's really not been driven by the Fed speak. It's been driven by the data, right? Okay. The market has reacted to the data. When the data suggests that there's risk of upside on inflation, the market reduces the amount of rate cuts for this year. When that unwinds, the market prices in more rate cuts. So I actually don't think that Chair Powell needs to say that much. That being said, though, I think it should be clear that if you look at simple policy rules, they would suggest, and this is regardless of your view on the labor market, simple policy rules would suggest that the appropriate policy rate right now is probably about 100 basis points lower than it is today. And that's just on inflation coming down alone. Because the Fed they don't see the Fed funds rate static for the last 13 months. They actually see the real Fed funds rate has risen 150 basis points in the last 13 months. That's equivalent to 5 more rate hikes. So policy has been getting incrementally tighter for the last year. And they recognize that it's time to kind of start to move away from that regime.
So when the Fed begins to cut rates, let's say it's September as the market's discounting, how do they do it? Do they do it every meeting, every other meeting, 25 basis points, 50 basis points, so they front load? How are you guys thinking about that?
So I think for now, it's still a gradual adjustment. So you could plug in those simple Taylor rules on your Bloomberg terminal and see that, okay, you know, the policy rate maybe should be closer to 3.5 to 4, but they're not going to do that instantaneously, right? I actually think that they are more likely to go 25 basis points per meeting, maybe for the next few meetings, and then switch to quarterly. But you know, that's all assuming status quo, and we don't know where the economy is going next year.
Do you have a crystal ball in your office?
No, we don't have a crystal ball.
Maybe the new office, Tom, when they go into the new offices.
The new offices now have a crystal ball.
Yep.
And I get a huge response to this out of YouTube. The basic idea here is if I get a Bob Michael, Kelsey Berro market, and I don't get down to reversion to the mean, I just get down to a long-term trend, one standard deviation above the mean, I have a total return vehicle. At JPMorgan, are you investing in fixed income for an assumed total return, or are you clipping a coupon?
Well, so far it's been a little bit of both. Is what we've gotten so far, right? You got a little bit of total return more recently, and then more so, the majority of what you're getting is clipping the coupon. But I do think, you know, over time, you are going to see that fixed income is going to continue to outperform cash as the Fed continues and starts that easing cycle.
I mean, Paul, to me, this is huge. Nobody has in their minds fixed income as the giant Dan Fuss at Loomis Sales. Yep. Nobody's thinking in the Dan Fuss manner.
Yep. I'm looking at, Kelsey, INGO on the Bloomberg Terminal, Bloomberg Index Browser, the best returning fixed income space, U.S. corporate high yield. Where did that come from? I thought we were having a recession. I mean, how's high yield doing so well?
Yeah, so I mean, I think really that's a combination of the fact that the economy has continued to do well, and that's really a story of clipping coupons. The index with the highest yields has performed with the greatest total return so far, and that's because spreads have been relatively stable. Right. So if you think about what our core thesis was for this year in terms of base case for investing, it was soft landing. And the key part of that was inflation coming down. You need inflation to come down for any of these things to work, right? In the bond market. Without that, you can't have any of it.
You know, what's Feroli telling you?
Well, you know, I think what we're seeing in the data is that the disinflation is becoming much more broad-based, and outside really 2 categories left in inflation, which is shelter and auto insurance, pretty much the rest of the CPI basket is running like it was pre-COVID.
One final question, because we've got to throw you out because the Detroit Tigers beat the Yankees. Kelsey, the heart of the matter is what are people doing with their money right now? Is any of the cash being deployed into the Michael Berro world, or same thing, are people extending duration?
I think they are, and I think the ways you can see it in fund flows, but I think you can also see it in the continued demand for corporate credit. You know, supply has really been pulled forward this year ahead of the elections.
That's like the 4th time we've heard that, Paul.
Yeah.
Smart people. I don't know.
And people are very interested in extending and you know, snapping up that credit, because companies in general, they were preparing for a recession. The recession didn't happen, but the good news is that their balance sheets are in a very good place.
Help me here. Why doesn't big tech, they make one phone call? They don't call James Dimon. They call Bob Michael. Let's be honest. Big tech's going to make one phone call, and they're going to do gazillions of debt issuance. And how many people does JPMorgan have to call to get that deal done? Like 4 people?
Yeah. Well, they just call upstairs to the investment management people, and then they say, I'll take the deal.
The demand, I think it's going to be a frenzy if we get some form of reversion to the great moderation. Do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, and you think about it, you know, you've already seen institutional investors, you know, extend duration, but this has happened without an actual cut, right? Like money market rates have not moved yet. But I think when they move, you're going to see a lot more people start to notice.
Okay, Kelsey Berro, thank you so much. Terrific brief. Kelsey Berro, working with Bob Michael and the team at Fixed Income at a small bank on Park Avenue. Greatly appreciate her attendance this morning. Red and green on the screen. Berro destroys the market. It was all up, all green. Now it's red and green on the screen. The VIX 15.53. Sweeney yield, the 2-year yield, 4.05%. 10-year yield, 3.86. I was quoting there, folks, to be clear, the corporate series, not the full faith and credit series in Well. Speaking of full faith and credit, don't stop watching the Tigers in the 7th inning. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. The Democratic National Convention begins today in Chicago. Tonight, President Biden will be the keynote speaker. He will make his address at 10:45 p.m. Wall Street time, and Bloomberg will carry it live. Biden will speak about the Democrat at the top of the ticket, Vice President Kamala Harris. Yesterday, Harris campaigned in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Harris contrasted her campaign's belief that lifting people up makes a leader strong with her opponent's political tactics.
Anybody who's about beating down other people is a coward. This is what strength looks like.
Former President Trump is planning events in 4 swing states during the 4 days of the convention, including a trip to the border later this week. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has that story.
Immigration has been a sweet spot for Republicans in their attack against Vice President Kamala Harris. Trump will be in Montezuma Pass Thursday, the same day Harris will accept the nomination. Now, Democratic Arizona Senator Mark Kelly on CBS has heard on Bloomberg says the Republicans just go to the border for photo ops, but says the truth is Trump is standing in the way.
I mean, he specifically told my Senate colleagues that they could not support this bill because he wanted to have this issue for the election.
Trump is scheduled to get a briefing as well at the border. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Israel today, meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other top Israeli officials. Blinken says it's time for the ceasefire for a hostage deal to get done.
It's also time to make sure that no one takes any steps that could derail this process.
Secretary Blinken will travel to Egypt tomorrow. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the daring military incursion into Russia's Kursk region aims to create a buffer zone. Sunday was the first time the president had clearly stated the aim of the operation that began August 6th. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg Tom, Paul, Lisa.
The Montezuma Pass.
What's that?
In the news broadcast, President Trump, I guess, is traveling to the Montezuma Pass.
Yes.
Where's that?
It's in Arizona. It's where Coronado entered Arizona.
Okay.
30 miles south of it in Mexico's where they invented Corinthian leather.
Yes, fine Corinthian leather. Right.
Fine Corinthian leather.
Okay.
Thank you to the Forest Service for this. They've got a nice paragraph on it. Arizona Highway 83 to the Montezuma Pass Scenic Drive. So, I'm sorry, folks in Arizona. I'm going to mispronounce this. Sonita? I guess so. Wow.
I don't know.
Every day I learn something. When I come in here, I never know what I'm going to learn.
That's a part of, I get to Vegas. That's about as close as I get to Montezuma, Arizona. I need to get out a little bit. I need to get off this island is the problem.
Sweeney and Keene, get a life. Bloomberg Surveillance brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Their portfolio analysts consolidate and analyze all your financial accounts on one powerful dashboard for free. Sign up for Portfolio Analyst at ibkr.com/free. PA. Right now, red and green in the screen. VIX coming in. It's a little better tape than it was 2-3 hours ago, but it's a Monday, August day. Some key economic data this week. Program note, 11 a.m., the Matthew Miller hour.
Yep.
Is it auto-free or is that easy demanded?
We'll have to see. We might get, who knows?
Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures, well, still pretty much treading water as the market focuses on Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where Fed Jay Powell expected to speak on Friday. So right now we have NASDAQ futures up about 0.1%, 20 points. Dow futures, little change, down about 8 points. And S&P futures, little change, up about 4 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.05%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 3.87%. That's down 1 basis point. To commodities, oil declined for the 4th time in 5 sessions. We have Brent crude $79 a barrel, WTI crude $76 a barrel. We have spot gold lower at $2,492 an ounce. To currencies right now, we have the dollar weaker, Japanese yen stronger, euro British pound stronger, Bitcoin down nearly 2.5% at 58,000. Shares of Shake Shack, Dutch Brothers, they're lower. Piper Sandler cut to neutral, so you have Shake Shack down about 3%, Dutch Brothers down about 2%. And to travel, where AAA is saying fewer Americans plan to travel internationally over Labor Day weekend. Now, the cost of international travel up 11%. The #1 Labor Day destination in the U.S. is Seattle. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash, Tom and Paul.
What'd you say?
The #1 U.S. destination for Labor Day, Seattle.
I would have never guessed.
Never guessed.
Why?
I've been, not too bad. Pretty good.
I love it. It's
Right
great
on the
town.
water,
Great
yes.
town, but
It's
I mean,
great. Le Shake to Shack is down.
Le Shake to Shack down
At
3%.
the Keene household, that can't be possible. I mean, what's your favorite? 5 guys? 3 guys? Shake to Shack? 4 guys?
No, Shake Shack. What's the other one? Smash Burger. That's one of my favorites.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I love those.
Remember they used to line up? There was, I think, in Bryant Park. I
Yeah.
can't remember. The line was like 4 miles long.
Yeah, and Madison Square Park. That's where the right outside.
We've been doing a lot of TRA today. Before we get to Peter, Peter, he eats 4 days a week at Shake Shack.
Does he?
You know,
Okay.
that's why he's on today. Is a tank. 16% a year. Okay.
Yeah.
I stand corrected.
Yeah.
Since 2015, 16% per year on Shake Shack. Joining us now, he's tried everything on the menu. Peter Scheer, head of Macro Strategy, Academy Securities. Peter, I love the bottom of your note, which is Wal-Mart spouted they're interested in AI. You're looking for AI successes. Where are they?
And that to me was really impressive that, excuse me, that Walmart came out and saying AI really helped them. We've seen so little of that away from that, right? We've seen all the AI users, everyone's announced plans to use AI, but very few success stories. That could change the dynamic. I've been a bit bearish on AI. I think it's overdone. I think it's overvalued. I think that's probably still the case. But that was really the first thing that caught my eye that said, ooh, I better rethink my views, because if Walmart likes it, maybe others really getting the benefit.
I'm going to say, Paul, I'm skipping over. There's all this AI baloney in my feed now.
Yeah.
And like they're like in front of like a normal search.
I know.
I'm still skipping over it all.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know what you're doing. But.
So, Peter, what do you make of this market here? I mean, we had some tremendous amount of volatility over the last couple of weeks, a real spook in the market a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago today. As you sit back and look at it, where are we going from here?
My first thought really has been overreaction. I think this market's very illiquid. There's not much depth of liquidity. And so we see overreaction in both directions. We probably should not have been as low as we were on August 5th. I don't think we should be as high as we are right now. We got too excited about jobless claims. So I think we are still susceptible to catalysts, and every catalyst moves this market more than it should. I think we kind of dismissed the recession talk last week on a couple numbers. I think we're going to get back to recession fear. So I think the market pulls back a little bit on recession concerns.
Then the Fed. I mean, are they going to come to the rescue here and start cutting rates and cutting aggressively against that? I mean, I guess we'll get a little bit of a feeling this week from Jackson Hole, but what's the Fed going to do?
I don't think they're going to do much. I think they're going to try and avoid the topic as much as possible at Jackson Hole, stick to kind of the message. And I think we're going to get 25 in September. It was well telegraphed. I don't see the economic data deteriorating rapidly enough for the Fed to change their mind. I think they should have gone in July, but what I think doesn't really matter. What's the Fed's going to do is what matters. That's what we're all trying to figure out. I think we get 25 in September, unless the data's horrible. And even then, it's not going to be a super dovish 25. They're going to say, hey, 25 now, let's see how this plays out.
Peter, Academy Securities has an overlay, which I think is very much agreed upon by my audience, listeners, and viewers alike. and that is you have a tangible worry about our debt and deficit. I'm still not seeing it discussed nearly enough like other cycles. When do we start discussing our debt and deficit?
You know, maybe after the DNC when we can start focusing on policy. I was kind of shocked about a month ago. Remember everyone like, oh, Trump's worse for the deficit? I think both sides are bad for the deficit. One side's going to tax their way into bigger deficits. The other side's going to spend their way into bigger deficits. I think as we get more out of, Harris, we will see that both sides are going to run this deficit higher. No one cares about the deficit, and we're going to get a return to risk premium. So the front end, which can be controlled by the Fed, will be fairly stable. But I think you see 10 years go back to 410, 420 based on deficit fears.
So I guess one of the questions here as we head into this election here is, how should investors be positioned here? I mean, it looks like it's kind of a toss-up at this point. Who knows how it's going to play out, but any way to get hedged through there?
I think right now, kind of the one gift is to be short 10s or short 30-year rates. I think, yes, the economy's slowing. Yes, the Fed will cut. But I think this deficit growth is really going to be the one message that comes loud and clear. No matter who wins, that's what we're getting. And that, to me, is kind of the obvious. And away from that, I think it's still a little bit too early to tell who's likely to win, what likely policies actually get implemented. So I'm not really doing much for my portfolio in terms of that. Other than I've been long energy, which I do think benefits from a Trump win, but much more of that's really along the lines of the geopolitical risk that remains.
So again, you're looking at, long energy, that's an interesting trade here. We've got WTI crude oil at $76. Where does that long trade get a little concerning for you in terms of where crude is trading?
I think if we see real talk of recession, where it's not just, a pullback or a bumpy landing, then I could see demand for oil decreasing dramatically. So that to me is, if the recession could overwhelm my oil trade. I think away from that, I like the industry. I think it's going to continue to grow. I think we're all on the page now that if we want a sustainable future, yes, we need to build out sustainable energy, but we really need to invest for the next 5 to 10 years in traditional energy. So I think that's where the opportunity is.
Is 60-40 sustainable? 60% equities, 40% bonds?
It's that somewhere in that ratio. I do think it makes sense for people to have. I like the income. What I don't think has been very good for people is people kind of have been carried away with, well, I can get 5% in money markets, so I want my money market funds. No way. I want 4% in longer dated bonds. I want muni closed end funds. I want to own some duration out here. Even though I'm slightly bearish, you're getting paid for that. Because I think the biggest risk is you get a recession, the Fed has to cut, and all of a sudden you miss the yield move down, and then that 60-40 won't play out. So I think 60-40 can work, but you're supposed to stay in duration, not money markets.
Peter, don't be a stranger. Peter Scheer, love to get you into the studios, Peter, in September. Maybe do 2 blocks there as well. Peter Scheer with Academy Securities, riding up a storm. Interesting on AI and the success. I don't have a handle on it, Paul. I just can't get there.
Well, I think initially, I think the market said, let's just get long NVIDIA. That's my play on all things AI. And then as we've kind of played it out over the last 18 months, it's branched out to some software, maybe even some other chip makers, and maybe even some of the users here. Now, as Peter's mentioning, you've got big companies like Wal-Mart calling it out.
Mrs. Barr called me up today. She knows that, she's up early. She's up early. She goes, Michael really doesn't want to come in today.
No.
After Detroit Yankees.
Yeah.
And I said,
2 out of 3.
If we play Detroit music, will he come in? And she said, yeah, sure.
Okay, there you go.
So we had Bob Seger on, and we're going to do Martha here in the next hour. I think this band, folks, when they broke right at the heart of the Beatles, Stones, was the only band where you said, that could be me.
Oh.
They were from north of Detroit, Warren, Michigan, and they splashed, and it was just shocking how they sounded like a high school band that had, made good out of Michigan.
Yep.
And I can't say what Mitch Ryder did in the Detroit Wheels. And, they stole from everybody within fabulous Detroit soul music. And they delivered it. And I think they had like a number 4 hit on the Billboard charts.
Solid.
And it was like, wait, they sound like they're in the garage we're in kind of thing. Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels. We're only doing this for Michael Barr because Detroit, they did it. Detroit did it.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Lisa Mateo, Michael Barr. Monday morning, markets lift finally. Red and green on the screen, sort of August, lethargy here. Maybe into the economic data, or maybe into Matt Miller appearing with Paul Sweeney at 11 a.m. But now, futures up 5, Dow futures up 20. We'll take it. VIX 15.52. There's 163,000 people at GM. There's some software engineers miserable.
Yep. Look at it. GM lays off more than 1,000 salaried software and services employees. Tom, you wonder to what extent this is tied to the EV efforts and maybe the slower than anticipated rollout across the industry, not just the GM, of kind of uptake of EVs.
We had Rivian. They said they couldn't get parts last week.
Yep.
I don't get it. The whole thing I don't get.
Well, I think it's just, for me, and I think for a lot of people, it's just like, what is the demand out there for EVs, really? After you get past the Matt Millers of the world, what do people really want?
Okay, what do you do in Wyoming? We're going to Jackson Hole.
Yeah.
Next door, a quart of milk can be 40 miles away.
Yeah.
How do you do an EV in Wyoming?
I don't know. That's why I'm sure you're going to go to, when you land in Wyoming on the Gulf Stream, you're going to hop right into a big Ford F-150.
First time I did, Patricia, the squirrel killer, put us into a hybrid. So it made like no noise or something. This is a million years ago. And we had roadkill because they couldn't hear us coming.
Exactly. You're going to hit a moose out there for who knows what's going to go on.
Do they have moose in Wyoming? Ken Fellio, do they have moose in Wyoming? They don't have moose in Wyoming, do they?
Oh, of course.
Moose are in New Hampshire.
No, they got everything out there. You're going to have a good time.
I actually, seriously, folks, I once stood with a wonderful park ranger at Jackson Hole, and he told us that the wildlife in the park, when you're looking at these unbelievable mountains, is more peopled with wildlife than it was like when Lewis and Clark were there.
Okay.
The food and the biome. I'm impressing Lisa here with this.
Yep.
The biome was so great that there's now more elk and
beautiful part of the world.
Antelope.
Best time of year too, unless you're a skier. Then you go out in the spring and ski.
Jackson Hole Friday. We'll look for that with, of course, a speech
live coverage
from Chairman Powell as well. Futures up 6 right now. The Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa Mateo.
Good morning. Yeah, we still got little movement in futures following Wall Street's best week since November. Right now, NASDAQ futures, little change, up about 15 points. Dow futures, little change there as well, up about 32 points. S&P futures, up about 0.1% or 6 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.06%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 3.89%, and that is little change. Not much in the economic calendar for today. We do have the Conference Board issuing that index of leading economic indicators for July, but really all eyes are set toward Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Fed Chair Jay Powell set to speak on Friday. Now, meanwhile, you had the Fed's Mary Daly told the Financial Times she has more confidence that inflation is under control. Neil Kashkari tells the Wall Street Journal he would be open to a September rate cut on weaker jobs market. Today, we're going to hear from the Fed's Christopher Waller in just a few moments. Over to commodities right now. We have spot gold lower, $2,490 an ounce. Brent crude, $79 a barrel. WTI crude, $76 a barrel. Shares of Estee Lauder trying to make a turn. ADRs were down about 4% when we started this show, now up about 1%. Profit outlook missed estimates. The company said its CEO plans to retire at the end of June 2025. And Kroger holding investor call starting today. It's weighing a new bond sale. Kroger up about 0.3%. And since you mentioned General Motors, we'll check in with their shares, up about 0.2% after reportedly cutting more than 1,000 software engineers. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Right to it. Lori Calvasina joins us this morning with all of her good work. Lori Calvasina, of course, with RBC. Lori, I'm just cut to the chase. Many would say in this odd rebound, this 10-day hellacious horror we've been through, that there's been a massive short cover on small caps. Are you recommitted to small caps this morning?
Hi, Tom. So look, I hate to say it, but I still feel pretty neutral on the small caps. Now, that's in regards to a relative call versus large. I do think the market is at large, small caps included. Probably did see the lows for the pullback we experienced on August 5th. But when I think about relative performance, look, I think one of the things that's really been pushing people into small caps and that's been generating some of these short-term outperformance pops is when the absolute valuations of the Russell 2000 are cheap. So that weighted median forward PE is below average. And guess what? As we updated the weekly at the end of last week, it was sitting right smack dab on top of the average. So we don't have, sort of the same kind of compelling valuation setup. Similarly, if I look at positioning on the CFTC data, we recently pulled up to 3-year highs, kind of post-COVID highs. And we've started to ease back from those, but they don't look under-owned at this point in time. And then I layer in the economy. I neither think we're about to tip into a recession. That's usually a really big springboard for small caps. And I also don't really see a hot economy. I see kind of a good, solid, fine economy, but small caps really either need the springboard coming out of recession, where you get really fast growth rates off the bottom, or you need a really kind of hot, above average economy to outperform it. I just don't have that right now.
I got 14 questions with Paul. Jump in here. I just don't get it.
Hey, Lori, I mean, we're pretty much through the earnings season here. We've got some retailers reporting this week. What did you take away from this earnings cycle, good, bad, or indifferent?
So I think it was pretty solid. I do think in some ways it got ignored with all these sort of macro gyrations, sort of debates over the consumer and the jobs, and then the yen carry trade unwind, which I know we'd all kind of like to forget right now. But I do think if you looked at the stats, we saw an uptick on the percent beating consensus earnings estimates. The revenue beats also picked up. The earnings beats kept outpacing the sales beats. And that just means companies are doing a good job of, kind of defying gravity, so to speak, and really managing margins. So that was all good. I thought the commentary was pretty balanced. There was maybe a bit more negativity on the consumer than what we saw last reporting season. But I came away with the impression that while the pressures from rates and inflation, consumers are reacting to that in a more profound way, companies went out of their way to sort of say, we think the consumer is still healthy and that they're managing through. So I thought it was pretty solid, to be honest.
Solid enough to support the valuation where we are in this market. How do you guys think about valuation of this market these days?
So we look at valuations a lot of different ways. If I'm looking at, sort of a forward PE, what I really like to do is separate the top 10 names and look at by market cap and look at a median PE there. That's still trading around 26 times. It got as low as 24. It was up around 32 at one point. Doesn't look great, but it's off the boil. If I look at, sort of the rest of the market, we've been sort of, really trading closely around kind of the 17 times mark. The average is around, sort of, I think around like 15 or so. So we're a bit above average, but we're way below past peak. So I think valuations, look pretty good for the rest of the market. If I look at a trailing PE analysis, that's where I kind of come away with the idea valuations are full. And I'll spare you all the details on the model, but I basically take inflation and interest rates in the Fed, do regressions with trailing PEs going back to the 60s, and we figure out where should the PE be at the end of the year if you think X, Y, and Z is going to happen on rates and inflation. 5,600 is already baking in, sort of 3 or 4 Fed cuts and PCE down around 2. So I feel like we've already baked in a lot of good news on the rates and inflation front, just on the S&P multiple itself.
But in that regression equation, how do you plug in a presumed lower real rate, the oomph the economy gets from a lower real yield?
So, we've got kind of all the bits and pieces there, right? We've got the 10-year, we've got the Fed funds, we've got the inflation rate. I'll tell you, Tom, I may lose some of your viewers right now, so I apologize if we do that. But I did experiment with this model at one point in time, having GDP baked into the model. I finally, sort of threw it out of the model. It didn't have a huge impact on the outcome, but I found GDP behaves differently relative to interest rates in different decades. So inflation, the Fed, 10-year yields, pretty much always inversely correlated. GDP, sometimes inverse, sometimes positive. I don't want to mess with that.
Yeah, Lori, thank you. Too much math. Lori Calvasina, thank you so much. RBC there on regression equations. To me, it's a little fuzzy, to say the least. We got a lift in the market. Futures up 8. Yep. Dow futures up 40. A better tape than 2 hours ago. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Democrats are coming together for their convention in Chicago, but infighting over the Israel-Hamas war continues. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has more.
The backdrop of the Democratic National Convention this week is made up of pro-Palestinian protests, incumbents ousted for criticizing Israel, and warnings from the left over rising anti-Semitism. Now, as the party tries to pull together in a show of unity, Democrats remain split over Israel's war in Gaza. Pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli groups say they'll be there, which means security is tight. Chicago and the DNC expect 50,000 visitors, 20,000 members of the press, and 5,500 delegates and more. President Biden speaks tonight. Former President Obama speaks tomorrow night. Former President Bill Clinton speaks on Wednesday, and Vice President Harris takes the stage on Thursday. Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Former President Donald Trump and his VP pick, Senator J.D. Vance, will talk to voters in battleground states across the country. Trump will campaign in York, Pennsylvania today, while Harris leads Trump by 4 percentage points in the latest ABC News Washington Post Ipsos poll. The survey also has Harris 9 points behind Trump on the economy. Vance says that provides them an opening.
The entire argument of the Kamala Harris campaign boils down to forget how good things were when Donald Trump was president. Forget that we had rising take-home pay. Forget that we had low inflation. Forget that we had peace all over the world.
J.D. Vance was a guest on Fox News Sunday, heard Sundays on Bloomberg. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Israel today for meetings with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other top officials. Blinken said the current round of Gaza talks may be, in his words, probably the best, maybe the last opportunity to achieve a ceasefire for hostage release deal. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the daring military incursion into Russia's Kursk region aims to create a buffer zone.
It is now our primary task in defensive operations overall to destroy as much Russian war potential as possible and conduct maximum counter-offensive actions.
Zelensky spoke Sunday through an interpreter. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
You guys help me here. I got a major problem.
Yep.
Brahma wants to go fishing.
Oh, boy.
So we only use Western River Anglers, Jackson Hole.
Sure.
They do like the Snake River, and you go up to Jellystone Park. 5 guests per boat, $1,400 base.
No problem.
They don't even throw in the license.
No problem.
You know, mountain lion and trout. Okay, so Western River Anglers does this thing, $1,400 large. Me, Bramo, Chairman Powell, Governor Bailey, and Philip Lane, because Lagarde's not going this year.
Okay.
There's a problem. Let me read the sentence here from Western River Anglers. Maximum combined guest weight
oh, dear.
cannot exceed 800 pounds.
No problem.
Now, Bramo, you know, she's cut and chiseled.
Yep.
Powell, layup.
Yep.
Between me and Governor Bailey, it ain't going to work.
Let's put it this way. Between me and you, that's 800 pounds right there, man.
Plus a case of Coors in there on ice, of course.
No. Yeah. Western River Anglers only uses Genesee Cream.
Oh, okay.
They fly it in from Western New York. Good morning to Western River Anglers, and we'll see if we can get. I think me and Brahma alone. You know, they get the little floaty thing with the thing you float down the river.
Yep.
I think even that we wouldn't make the weight thing. Oh, and Brahma's serious. She does all this stuff. I just sit in the Pioneer Grill having buttermilk pancakes. Jackson Hole coming up Friday. An important speech by Mr. Powell. Futures lift up 8. Dow futures up 34. The VIX 15.43. Paul, what are you looking at? Look at gold. Come on.
Absolutely. Looking at gold here. Pulling back a little bit off about 0.3%, $2,500 for an ounce of gold. And we're going to call it out in honor of Matt Miller on an 11 o'clock hour. We got Bitcoin off 2%.
We're going to do better.
58,600 for Bitcoin. But it did bounce off that 50,000 level just a couple of weeks ago.
In the 9 o'clock hour, she'll be seeing either Cubs or White Sox. Anne-Marie Horton to join us here in a moment. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Traders starting on the week on a cautious note. The Democratic National Convention kicks off in Chicago. And also investors looking to this week's Fed meeting in Jackson Hole. Right now we have NASDAQ futures up about 0.1%, 31 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 44 points. S&P futures up about 9 points. The 2-year yield, 4.07%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 3.89%, and that's up 1 basis point. Some deal-making news and a challenge to NVIDIA. AMD agreed to buy server maker ZT Systems. It's a cash and stock transaction valued at nearly $5 billion. AMD up about 1%. NVIDIA up about 0.2%. And we've been hearing about Circle K operator Couche-Tard possibly making a bid for 7 & I. That's a Japanese company convenience store chain operator of 7-Eleven. But now we're hearing Couche-Tard has announced that it's reached an agreement to acquire GetGo Cafe and Markets from supermarket retailer Giant Eagle. Couche-Tard down about 0.3% in Canada. And the SEC has announced charges against Carl Icahn and his publicly traded company Icahn Enterprises. That's for failing to disclose pledges of the company's securities as collateral for billions in personal loans. Icahn Enterprises down about 4%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. John Farrell had the Gulf Stream yesterday. He was Chelsea Man City.
Yep.
2-0. He hates when
2-0.
2-0.
That's how they,
that's how they say it there.
I think so. I don't know.
Anyways, he had the Gulf Stream. Emery Horton did not. Although she was, Farrell, attitude adjustment there. So she sat in LaGuardia all night in the terrible storms that we had. When do you get to Chicago? Good morning, Emery Horton.
Good morning.
When do you get there?
I'm literally working that out now. So far, the only flight I can get on is actually tomorrow afternoon.
Really?
Yeah, so I can't even get out tonight. Potentially, I could drive.
Don't we know
12,
some people
13
with
hours.
planes?
Not sure if everyone wants
Well, have one
to
of your
see Amory
interns-
behind the wheel for
No,
12
have
hours.
your interns drive. It's a long drive. You get out to Cleveland,
You think
and
you're
it's
there,
like
but-
you think you're there, and
forget about
no,
it.
you're not there. What will Mr. Biden say tonight? We haven't covered this in all the time that we've had this morning. I mean, this is the guy that beat Trump. That's all there is to it, right?
The guy that beat Trump, it's really a swan song. I feel like the DNC, there's going to be 2 modes. One is a goodbye to Biden, and I think he's going to get a lot of respect and admiration in the room. And Biden himself will pivot at some point in the speech about how this is so important because he's going to try to frame it about democracy. And then it'll be the proper passing of the torch to Kamala Harris when she gives her speech on Thursday. But then Biden's out of there. So I still personally think you can feel that tension there is. It's still unclear whether him and Nancy Pelosi have spoken since he bowed out nearly 4 weeks ago. Well, he's giving a speech and then he's leaving. He's not sticking around.
Yeah, I mean, Nelson Rockefeller didn't go after Barry Goldwater. She has no idea what I'm talking about.
Is that notable that he is leaving immediately after his speech, do you think?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think
Yeah.
it just shows, he has 6 months left of his term. He's a lame duck president, and he is passing on the torch and getting out of the way is what it feels like with his speech on Monday, and he's not sticking around for the other high-profile events of the week.
In the snarkdom of the weekend, a number of people said, okay, but who's running the White House? Who is running the White House, Anne-Marie Horton?
I think it's a number of people when you think about, depending on the policies and what they're trying to get done. So, I mean, the president obviously is still engaged. We talked to Amos Hochstein, one of his chief advisors,
What did
who
he
just
say?
got
He's
back
quite
from
good.
Beirut. The president is really leaning into foreign policy. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Israel today. He met with President Herzog. He's going to meet with Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem. And he said this feels like almost the last-ditch effort for negotiations. And a lot of that is being fueled by Biden. And Amos Hochstein was saying how a lot of compromise would need to happen. We pushed him on whether or not the president is lame duck. Can he get this done? Because he's not running, and he's not going to be president come January. And it does feel like the president is squarely focused on this. Remember, we're also waiting for that potential retaliation from Iran.
Yeah.
And the president had said last week that these two are interchanged. He said potentially a ceasefire negotiation would mean you can hold off an Iranian attack. The Iranians overnight said that's not true, and we will at some point retaliate.
Vice President Harris, what do you think is on her agenda for this week? What would be a win? Because it seems like, boy, this honeymoon is continuing for VP Harris.
Honeymoon is continuing to a point. I would look at the nuance of the Sunday talk shows. You had a lot of Democrats coming out and having to explain this price gouging policy they're interested in. And on Friday, Kamala Harris said basically all they want to do is go to the FTC or go to Congress to go to the FTC and make price gouging illegal federally, especially when it comes to grocers. Right now, it's illegal in most states. And this is something that then every Democratic leader, Gretchen Whitmer, Coons, had to be asked about. Coons was like, she's a free market capitalist. Gretchen Whitmer says you're reading too much into it. But it's notable that one of the top economic priorities from this campaign is already getting a tremendous amount of pushback from the moderates that both sides, Trump and Kamala Harris, are vying for.
What's your reporting, particularly sitting for 14 hours at LaGuardia trying to get out of Dodge? What is your reporting on the distance between Mr. Trump and his people advising him on the campaign?
Well, I think you're going to see a lot of that this week. What kind of Mr. Trump do we get this week? He's doing full-on counter-programming in all the swing states, and he's going to the border on Thursday. And is this someone who just hones in on the policy? Does he do what Lindsey Graham says to do? Focus on policy. That's how you win the White House. Don't be a showman.
Right.
Or does he go after some of the personal attacks?
Yeah. Let me ask you about Henrietta Treyz. We had an earlier. We asked her. Let's just do it again. The Palestinian protests, the Gaza protests, are they narrow, or is there a breadth there?
Well, based off Kaylee Lyons was just joining us, she already made it to Chicago.
Excuse me, Paul. Kaylee Lyons talks to Amory Horton, doesn't have time for us.
No,
Do you
that's
notice
okay.
that?
We understand.
Well, she was doing me a favor because I couldn't make it there. So Kaylee was talking about how the fact that even streets were blocked off when she landed, and the DNC hasn't even she landed over the weekend, didn't even kick off in earnest. So I would say that they are going to be at the DNC as they have been the past few months. You don't always tune into what was a Biden rally, now are Kamala Harris rallies. The protesters show up at these events, and we've seen Biden and Harris have to deal with them in certain ways. So they will be there at the DNC, and that's why people are talking about the DNC in Chicago of 2024 being reminiscent of 1968.
So how do you get there today? Do you drive to, I'm making it up, do you drive to Pittsburgh and then go Pittsburgh to Chicago?
I'm working on it. All flights are really sold out. I was sitting there at
But
LaGuardia with delegates, New York delegates who were like, I need to get there to cast my vote. So everyone is trying to get on these flights. The flights today were already booked. Plus, there's a ton of people at JFK. I tried JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark. Had a whole tour of the New York airports.
Don't we have people that can help out stars like Henry?
Yeah, we throw on a Sikorsky and fly her to Pittsburgh. That's what you do.
Odd.
Amory Horton, thank you so much. Seriously, safe travels.
Yes, exactly.
As well. Amory Horton driving all of our political coverage here as we look to Chicago. She lifts the market. Futures up 6. Dow futures up 32. Amory, we quote the Dow if you've noticed, 15.43.
Boomer.
Gold 25.28 the ounce. And did you see how Amory and I styled this weekend?
Yep.
We did a leopard thing. She called me up. She says, I'm doing the leopard thing. Can you?
Okay.
Leopard's a neutral.
It's a neutral, Leopard's a neutral. Okay, thank you. That's what Cartier says. Yeah. The VIX, the DXY rather, 102. Yen, seriously, yen comes in stronger, 146.39.
Yeah,
that bears careful scrutiny through the week to see what Japanese yen does. Paul mentions Bitcoin down a stick. A stick in Bitcoin talks 1,000.
Yep.
Jumps around like crazy.
Yeah, it's all over the place. But
58,000. Did Miller ever sell out of his? Did he find his passcode?
No, he has not found his passcode, as far as I know. So he still is long Bitcoin, probably down around that $3,000 level. But of course, he doesn't have the little code to actually trade it. So it's just an ill-gotten gain at the moment, or unrealized gain, let's call it.
We're going to look to the economy, and we really haven't focused on the specifics of the Powell speech, whether it's 9 minutes or 19 minutes. There's the famous walk Powell. Maybe the governor of the Bank of England, maybe other worthies will make the walk at Jackson Hole. They walk out, they turn right, they go out to the split rail fence.
Really?
And they look out on the lake, and he points and he says, that's where Bramo hit the trout over the head with a canoe paddle. It's right out there. Stay with us. Bloomberg Surveillance again. Futures up 6.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
The Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo, alongside Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. Now, the markets have really been pretty quiet before the bell. Traders kind of in this wait-and-see approach to signs and the scope of potential interest rate cuts from the Federal Reserve. Stocks are following Wall Street's best week since November, so how are they going to shape up on the start for a new trading week? Let's get to it right now. We'll start with the S&P 500, up about 0.1%, 4 points. We have the Dow up about 0.1% as well, up 37 points at 40,701. We have the Nasdaq up 0.2%, 18 points at 17,651. We have the 2-year yield at 4.07%, up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 3.89%, and that is little change. Commodities, oil declined for the 4th time in 5 sessions. Right now we have Brent crude $79 a barrel, WTI crude $76 a barrel. We have spot gold lower, $2,491 an ounce. At the open, I want to check in with AMD. Their shares up about 0.1%, but it agreed to buy server maker ZT Systems, that cash and stock transaction valued at nearly $5 billion. And that's kind of boosting its efforts to challenge NVIDIA. We have NVIDIA actually just went down about 0.5%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
She does a report for kids sitting on the couch day trading Robinhood.
Exactly.
You know, she's doing NVIDIA microanalysis trade. Joining us now, Michael McKee, who drives all of our coverage at Jackson Hole. I really can't say enough to his commitment of well over 20 years of conversation on economics. To show you how informal this is, I got out of the car from the airport last year. It's dark. It's probably 9 p.m., that beautiful mountain air.
Awesome.
And I had to walk, 4 feet to the door to get into the lodge. And holding the door for me was Jerome Powell.
No kidding.
That's how casual,
it is. All right.
it is. And his secret, he was coming back from dinner or whatever. Michael McKee joins us now. Michael, we want to get to all the speech and all the econ baggage. What happens behind the scenes? Like, people show up Wednesday, Thursday. Do they really go hiking and we make jokes about trout fishing? What do people actually do when they're not looking at 42-page PDFs?
Well, I think the most popular thing is hiking. And the Kansas City Fed organizes hikes for Friday and Saturday. And a lot of people go.
Like 3,000 steps?
You're going up a hill. In the old days, Don Cohn, when he was vice chairman of the Fed, was known as the hiking animal. He would lead people up the mountain at a high rate of speed. And people were always afraid to go out. Last year, the group with a bunch of Fed officials in it went out and got about halfway up the hike, and the heavens opened, and they all came back just soaked. And that was the story of
that set the tone for the conference. So, I mean, so who else besides the Federal, who attends here? Who comes to this thing?
Well, it's largely academic economists. There are some central bankers from around the world, and of course, Fed officials are there.
Is it an invitation only?
It's invitation only, and a number of years ago, used to be a lot of Wall Street economists, and they've shifted away from that to academic economists.
Why?
Largely because I think they felt the Wall Street economists were sort of trading on. Some of them were trading on the idea of being invited, and they also felt that they wanted to focus on the academic side of things, because this is really a conference about papers exploring theories in economics. Jay Powell talks about the current economy, and we'll do interviews with people about the current economy, but when you go into the room, you don't hear about the current economy.
So does new economics, does it get broken there? I'm not sure what the right term is, but has this conference, has it generated new ideas, new theories that have over time have
It
developed?
has, yes. And it's been an opportunity for people to discuss things. When years ago in the 1990s, when John Taylor introduced the Taylor Rule, that was the subject of a couple of conferences as people got their arms around what that meant and what it meant for inflation. Michael Woodford, Tom, introduced the idea of forward guidance in a paper at Jackson. So, yes, things work their way into economic policy over time.
Gowdy Egerton will be there from Brown University, I believe. We're efforting him right now. Give us a vignette into why it's important for a younger academic of international acclaim, like Dr. Egerton of Iceland and Providence. Why is it important for him to show up? Is it just to buff up with Chairman Powell? Or, to me, it's really about the papers.
It is about the papers, and this is a prestigious event, and there are usually 3 or 4 papers, and so there's not a lot of competition. And if you've been invited to write one, then you've sort of made it.
I agree.
If your focus is monetary policy.
And Paul, this is something people don't know. McKee's in the room. I'm not. There's a room, a private room, where the economists are in. Help me here, Mike. Selected media. Like
there's one from every financial news organization, and it's invitation only too as well.
There's 2 doors, and next to it is a big grizzly bear, like 8 feet tall in a plastic case. What's inside that room like? Are people dozing off because they had the buttermilk pancakes at the Pioneer Grill?
It's been known to happen. It's been known to happen. I mean, it is kind of a rustic room, and you're all sitting at sort of plain tables, and there is a lot of econometrics being discussed and math. And so you know that you might feel a little bit hazy after a while. Biggest improvement they have made, and you don't go back far enough, Tom, but they didn't used to have coffee until 7 or 7:30 in the morning, and of course,
you
we're
guys
all
are up
earlier than that. And now they have rectified that. They put a little coffee bar in, and I have run into some central bankers at about 6 a.m. who were desperate.
Exactly. So, our Fed Chairman Jay Powell, ideally, how does he use this platform this week?
I think he reiterates what he's already said. I don't think he really goes beyond that. It's kind of hard for him to say we're not going to cut rates, but I don't think he wants to say guarantee we're going to cut rates.
Right.
We get a partial green light, but he will also emphasize that there is more data to come in September before we get to their meeting on the 18th.
How ex post is a central bank within all your study and reading back to McChesney Martin, 1951? Are they as ex post after the fact, waiting for data more than any other Fed?
Well, there's a little bit of confusion about this. The Fed is data dependent, and they have hung decisions on the idea of having data come in showing what is where the economy is. But they also spend a lot of time talking with business leaders and consumers, CEOs, to get a flavor for what is happening now before the data is recorded. Now, the Fed used to operate in the Greenspan years as preemptively. They would raise rates when they thought inflation was going up. And now they don't do that anymore. They wait longer, which turned out to be an error, a policy error with the post-pandemic.
Have you ever had the trout and eggs, $25, 2 eggs, Idaho trout filet with dill cream fraiche and home-style potatoes? Have you ever had that at the Pioneer Grill?
I have not, but it sounds like something,
I think this year
something
I
worth
have to
trying.
Yeah. I would never have trout.
I've had all those things
eggs,
separately, but I've not had them all.
I've
on
never
one
had
plate.
that.
You never had trout?
Do you know they took chip beef toast off the menu? My mother's favorite.
Yeah, who
chip
doesn't?
Beef toast. Well, they went granola. They went. McKee complained, and now they have fruit bowl.
Granola in Wyoming?
A fruit bowl in Wyoming. How about that Wyoming fruit?
Well, it's not picked right outside the door. That's for sure.
Get some venison, Tom. I think venison.
Yeah, the venison is very good out there.
It is.
Yeah.
And then, Paul, there's biscuits and sausage gravy.
Now we're talking. That's
like,
my language.
That's the Cracker Barrel stole that from the Pioneer.
So we have to settle this debate, Tom. Earlier today, John Farrow suggested that he was afraid of bears out there, but you were not.
Oh, no. You can ask Emily, who developed this with me years ago. The bears, they scare me like nuts because I had Adirondack experience with bears, but the bears in the Adirondacks are teensweens compared to out there.
Yeah. Well, that's, I mean, if you don't go hiking, you probably won't run in.
But if you're out at night, it's
We've
not
had
funny.
moose up on the back lawn, but we have not had a bear.
Is there moose in Wyoming?
There are moose. There are fewer moose than there used to be, and a lot of people put that on the wolves that were reintroduced to Yellowstone. Wolves.
I thought the media was the wolves.
Wolves, unfortunately, can't read, so when it says leaving Yellowstone, they just kind of keep going, and that's pushed a lot of the moose out. So you see fewer moose these days.
Interesting.
But we will have a moose cam. We'll always be looking for moose.
Yes.
Out there.
All right.
We do. We look at it. There's
the pride of
elk,
Colorado.
You know, people laugh. They say Brahma's never hit a trout over the head with a canoe paddle, but she did last year.
From the Upper West Side of New York.
She has promised to go canoeing again.
Yeah. Michael McKee, thank you so much. Really anticipating this speech. I'm with Mike. I think it's going to be step lightly, I should say, and really, we'll have full coverage of it, and we'll have really good conversation with a set of guests. And
So
Mike
Friday.
providing leadership. Mike, you got to get up. Bars in, and the Detroit Tigers beat the Yankees, so you got to get up.
All right.
Give them some respect.
I will. As long as the Tigers are winning, then all hats off to Michael Barr.
Once
and
a
if
year.
they're and as a Red Sox fan, if they're beating the Yankees,
Got that right.
Exactly. 2 out of 3.
Dreaded Yankees down in flame. Michael McKee, thank you so much. Red and green on the screen. Let me give you levels: 40,700. Market up 40,800 on the Dow. Market up 5,600 SPX. We're not there yet. NASDAQ, a little bit, T-Sweets red. You're 19,500 on the NASDAQ. Extraordinary to know where we were versus 10 weeks
I think we send
ago.
McKee out to Jackson Hole tomorrow. I mean, he's like.
Oh
early.
yeah, he's like
Early.
real,
He's there
yeah,
all in.
I'm like a tourist.
Yeah, you and Lisa
they
are
laugh
tourists.
at me.
No,
They don't
he's out
laugh
there.
at McKee. He's like legitimate Western guy.
Yep.
Sort of like Michael Barr is as well. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. The Democratic National Convention is kicking off today in Chicago, just weeks after President Biden ended his campaign and endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris. President Biden will be center stage giving a primetime speech tonight. It's scheduled for 10:45 p.m. and Bloomberg will carry it live. Democrats are hoping pro-Palestinian protests in Chicago won't overshadow Kamala Harris's big week. Henrietta Treyz is managing partner at Veda Partners.
The protest is going to be about a mile long. They have moved it away from the convention. I'm sure, I know that the Democrats have anticipated these protests. I think that the biggest area of concern for them is the state of Michigan, which there is a big population, about 300,000 people who are even in the range of focusing on this the way that the protests would suggest.
Henrietta Treyz with Veda Partners says the protesters make up a small subset of the Democratic Party and are not likely to shift the polling much in the race. She was a guest on Bloomberg Surveillance. There's word disgraced Republican ex-Congressman George Santos plans to plead guilty today to multiple felony counts in a federal fraud case. Santos spent much of his 11 months in office engulfed in scandal and marginalized by his fellow lawmakers following revelations that he had lied about much of his past. A guilty plea would spare Santos from a high-profile trial in New York next month. The question now is, will he serve prison time? He faces 23 federal counts, including wire fraud, money laundering, theft of public funds as well. Finally, some sad news. Talk show host pioneer Phil Donahue has died.
Thanks very much, Delani Barbach, Ph.D., University of California. The book is titled Shared Intimacies. I'm glad you were with us and hope you have a nice day.
Donahue was the husband of Marlo Thomas. The cause of death was not immediately disclosed, though his family said he had been suffering from a long illness. Phil Donahue, 88. Global News, 24 hours a day. I'm Michael Barr, and back to Tom and Paul and Lisa.
And Oprah Winfrey said it's simple. He invented it.
Yes.
There's no words, folks, for the impact that Phil Donahue had on everything Lisa Mateo, Michael Barr, Paul Sweeney, and I do. No measurement.
I remember him back, and now I'm being funny, when he had the jet black hair, and it was a syndicated show that he had way back in the late 60s. He was great.
He was an absolute cultural fixture. Phil Donahue at 88 years old. Dow up 113 points. From New York City on a Monday, this is Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateos. Well, we've got a slight lift to the markets as they focus in on Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Fed Chair Jay Powell set to speak on Friday. So right now we have the Nasdaq up 0.1%, 20 points. We have the Dow up 0.2%, 98 points. The S&P 500 up 0.1% or 9 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.06%, up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 3.89%, and that is little changed. Spot gold lower, $2,489 an ounce. Brent crude $79 a barrel. WTI crude $76 a barrel. Shares of Estee Lauder, they're lower, down nearly 2%. ADRs. Its profit outlook missed estimates. The company said its CEO plans to retire at the end of June 2025. And shares of Fubo TV, they are on the rise. They're up about 28%. Look at that. Whoa. After Fox, Warner Brothers Discovery, Walt Disney, they were blocked by that judge from launching their streaming sports service. And finally, a new trend in online dating. The Wall Street Journal says people are not asking for phone numbers, but instead credit scores. Yeah, what? They want to make sure their potential suitor is not in a financial hole. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
That worked for me.
Yeah, that's a good line.
What's your credit score?
Yes, exactly.
What? Fubo?
Fubo TV.
Fubo?
Yes, correct.
Laura Martin.
What is Fubo?
Advertising supported streaming.
Like you watch a movie and there's ads in it.
Yeah, and or TV shows or anything, and they got it. But the big thing is this new sports package, which is going to be, ESPN, Fox, a bunch of other things, got blocked. Venue, the new streaming service, is going to be all sports, blocked by the judge.
Because
so that's
that
a big win.
So you pay a monthly fee to Fubo, and you can watch a lot of sports, Premier League, NFL.
Yeah.
And so they tried to block the 3 people, and they succeeded.
Yeah.
Can I get Fubo?
Sure. I think you get.
Can Jamie Patton
They will
get
take your
Fubo?
credit. Jamie Patton can get Fubo. They'll take anybody's credit card.
Joining us now from TCW, Trust Company of the West, Jamie Patton, co-head of global rates there. Now, Jamie, what is your set forward out 1 year, out 2 years? Do you see a disinflation of price up and yield down?
Yes. We are long duration. We're concentrated that long in the front end of the curve. We do think that inflation has peaked and is coming back down. The Fed will be pleased with that. But where I think we differ from the market is that we also expect a much harder landing than what's currently priced in.
So that implies a global disinflation, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So, I mean, but you, Jamie, you guys at TCW have always been in that camp, it seems like, across the board here. What leads you to the sense that this economy is going to land maybe a little bit more harder than people think?
So a few reasons. First of all, the consumer is becoming stretched and will face increasing headwinds without the tailwinds of excess stimulus, excess savings, stimulus checks, and things like that it's had for the past few years. And we're also seeing the bite from higher rates creep up the economic food chain. And what really gives us pause and makes us concerned about this soft landing narrative is that we talked all about the longer lags that are priced in, or the longer lags as the Fed raised rates. And we saw that. The Fed raised rates over 500 basis points, over 5%. And we saw less than 80 basis points of tightening in corporate bonds. For example, the weighted average coupon of Bloomberg's credit index only rose 80 basis points when the Fed is raising rates over 500. Right. Similarly, in mortgages, the effective rate, how much people are actually paying on mortgages outstanding, it's only risen 60 basis points. So it just shows that really we haven't seen much transmission.
Jamie, I just because of time, I want to get to this because I think for our listeners and viewers across the nation, it's absolutely stunning. You have the most stunning paragraph, a set of 5 bullet points on housing I've seen this year. Only 6% of mortgages are floating rate. In the Bloomberg Ag, 85% of fixed rate conventionals don't refi until below 2.75%. So give us the TCW translation of what our housing behavior will be.
So what this means is that people in the United States are not going to feel it when the Fed cuts rates. So if you're sitting out here hopefully we don't lose our jobs, but the unemployment rate will probably rise. And you're paying the average effective mortgage rate, and the Fed cuts rates, let's say 200 basis points. It still doesn't really matter to you. Your mortgage is not yet economic to refinance. And that's where we're really worried. So Powell's speaking later this week, and the topic of his discussion is reassessing the effectiveness and transmission of monetary policy. Now, they didn't invite me to Jackson Hole, which is a shame because I hear it's beautiful in the summer. But if I were there and I were making this speech, I would say it's not effective. The transmission of monetary policy is broken.
I can't say, Paul, how important these observations are, backed up by facts from TCW. The housing market that we perceived in New York City, complete fiction. Compared to the reality of all cash buyers out there.
Exactly. So, Jamie, let's assume the Fed does begin cutting it in September. How do they do it going forward? Is it every meeting? Is it every other meeting? Is it 25 basis points? Is it 50 basis points? Is there a game plan out there, do you think?
I don't think they have a great game plan. I think they're going to remain data dependent. But most importantly, I don't think it matters. If the Fed cuts rates 25 basis points or 50 basis points, maybe the signaling is important. But given this lack of effectiveness and lack of transmission of monetary policy down to the consumer, it just doesn't matter. The Fed could reduce rates by 200 basis points, and that person's mortgage is still not economic to refinance.
So I guess, one of the issues here for investors is, how aggressive do you think this Fed is going to be? Where do you think they would like rates to be?
Well, it's interesting because we think they would like to get rates back to neutral, but the market is pricing rates to stay incredibly tight for a really long time. We have, even this time next year, the market is pricing Fed policy rates to be in the mid threes. That's still 100 basis points restrictive over the Fed's own neutral.
But does a price up yield down if they act? Forget about the effect on the American public. You're brilliant. But are you still going to see rates come in with Fed action?
Yes. So as the Fed cuts policy rates, you almost always tend to see rates across the board come down and the price of bonds come back up. And now this is also a function of bonds are bonds again. So when we see this risk off move, you're going to see bonds rally and vice versa. So with our macro view that the weakening economy is going to drive the Fed, especially this late in the cycle, you're going to see bonds react accordingly. And that's another reason that we're long bonds, we're long duration, and in the front end of the curve, which is most sensitive to Fed policy rates.
This has just been wonderful. Jamie Patton, thank you so much. TCW on the left coast. Don't be a stranger when you're in New York, Jamie. I think it would be great to get you. Her paragraph on housing is the most devastating.
I didn't know any of that.
Seen.
It's exactly.
Basically, the summary, folks, is you don't get the enthusiastic mortgage reaction until 2.75%.
Yep.
I would have thought it was double that. You get a 4.99% 30-year, and people go mental.
That's what I would have thought. 1 in 3 home purchases are made with cash today. 40% of homes owned free and clear. They don't have a mortgage. I didn't know that either. So, but all I know is that Alex Steele has got a mortgage 2 3/4% more.
That kills you, doesn't it?
It does.
That's changed your relationship.
So, basically she says, we're never leaving. So I think that's kind of that's the issue for a lot of people. Why get out of that kind of mortgage to go somewhere else, get a new property when the mortgage rates start with a 6 handle?
I had a lot of fun with Michael Barr today. Thank you, Mike McKee, for those comments on the Yankees, the dreaded Yankees losing to the Detroit Tigers. in the Detroit of Michael Barr, it's Bob Seger and it's Mitch Ryder and that, but it's one guy, 94 years old, Barry Gordy. You just can't say enough about the contribution here. The Metropolitan Museum of Art had a guitar show years ago, and they had some of the original Motown instruments.
Really?
From all that they did there. And there's any number of ways you can go here, the miracles and the rest of it. But I can't say enough about a movie, Cadillac Records. It's an Andrew Lack production, but Cadillac Records is well worth seeing.
Okay.
It's Beyonce's in it. She steals the show. Martha and the Vanillas, they taught a lot to Beyonce. Good morning.